in Deschutes County, and we've historically, well over a decade at least, received this grant. And this year we anticipate receiving about $92,616, of which there'll be a match of at least that. And this will fund personnel costs to do emergency management. So, and
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
The matching funds come from the one of the two law enforcement districts.
Yeah, matching funds come from the sheriff's office, the countywide services budget. Yep. Fund.
So any other discussion or a motion?
I first have to say, I just told Nathan about the fire right by my family's ranch in Hebner on Little Butter Creek. A bird hit the transformer, fell on the ground and started a grass fire last night. So get the message via Facebook if there's a fire at the ranch. Anyhow, yeah, my other sister could have called maybe, but fortunately, my sister, there were about 3 or 4 fire groups that all came out. The collaboration was unbelievable, and I'm so thankful because, you know, you see how grass fires are, you see the Newell fire in Washington State and how big it is now. I think, would you say 50,000 acres or something?
I think it's grown pretty rapidly.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, and we're supposed to get 25-mile-an-hour winds this afternoon. The local news is right. So anyway, thank you, Nathan, for what you do. As I've told you earlier, you are known as the best emergency manager in the state.
Oh, boy.
I know. I think how many other people.
Pressure.
Yeah.
No, really, it's said at these state meetings. I'm thinking like anybody else is listening, it could hurt their feelings. But thank you, Nathan. I'm so glad
You're a good team.
you live here and you do such a fabulous job.
Thank you.
So move authorization of the sheriff's office, Deschutes County Sheriff's Office to submit an application for an emergency management performance grant to support Deschutes County Emergency Management Program.
Second.
Any other discussion? Seeing that, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes.
All right.
Very good. Thank
Very
you.
much.
I did also just want to ask though, the full team, the full emergency management team, like what are the other fund sources then?
Just primarily just this grant and district one. Yep.
But I would guess there's more than just the matching funds, the one-to-one matching.
Yes.
funds For this,
Yeah.
that it takes to stand for 3, right?
Yeah, and we, one of those positions is vacant currently, but yeah, it's, historically, this has been anywhere maybe up to around a third or so. I have to do some math, but yeah, we more than match the grant requirement. So, yeah. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
You too.
How's the technology going?
Still waiting for the slides to come through.
Well, remember they have to go to Connecticut first.
Like 5 minutes or? Okay, close.
Can't close.
Yeah, so we'll stand by.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So we have a second.
Yeah.
I see something. We called Mary Friday, in the middle of the day, actually, the Chief Justice. He'd already said, I called Billy Williams when he emailed Andy Carr Wednesday morning. He had already contacted the Mexican Circuit Court and we wanted to get to the circuit court.
Brought my reading glasses for that financial report.
Honestly, actually, just wanted to catch up. I'm curious the ADU thing too.
Well, I was waiting for you.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go back to agenda item 1, medical examiner update here in a moment, then ADUs will be following. Good to see you.
No, you gotta be from a power position.
I can just talk.
Yeah, we can get started.
If the slides pop up, that's great. If not, that's totally fine.
So welcome to our medical examiner office, and here's an update. Let's work on our relationships here, get to know each
Yep.
other. So
Thank you guys so much for having us. My name's Annie Onishi.
I'm Maureen McCaffrey.
I'm Lynette Newsom.
And we are the relatively new medical examiner team. We took over for Dr. Jana Van Amberg in October of 2022. So we've been coming up on just about a year of service to Deschutes County, and we're happy to have a few minutes to give you an update about our office. Our volume has increased essentially exponentially over the last couple of years, as I'm sure you're aware. And the state medical examiner's office is going through a ton of changes, which maybe you're familiar with or not. I had a few slides about that, but the state medical examiner's office is completely inundated with cases and volume, and they are incredibly short-staffed. They need about 10 more pathologists to be a fully functional state office. They're out of morgue space, they're out of morgue techs. It is sort of dire straits over there. As of July 1 of this year, state medical examiner's office is no longer covering 14 of the 36 counties in Oregon. So they were serving as the county medical examiner for quite a few counties, and they're no longer doing that. So quite a few responsibilities that were previously being covered by the state ME's office are now being covered by individual counties to varying degrees of success. Our county medical examiner's office has been up and running for many, many years at this point. So we're sort of caught up to speed on some of that stuff, but we are being asked to do more and take on more volume and take on more responsibility. So especially with all of the drug use in the area, all the sort of problems that go along with that. That is where the vast majority of our case volume comes from, as well as visitors to the area. So if a visitor passes away while they're visiting Deschutes County, that becomes our jurisdiction. And as our county continues to age. So we sign all death certificates for folks who pass away of accidental causes, and that includes a ground level fall for grandma at the nursing home. So that is sort of the crux of why we're so busy and why we need more money.
All right, you're don't hear the slides.
Oh, that's very helpful.
Oh, gosh.
Thank you so much. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Slide view
Yeah.
and
But that's basically the punchline of what we're asking for. Eric, if you don't mind, just next couple slides.
you gotta go.
This is
go.
this is us. We're just here to say hi. For Maureen and I, this is not our full-time job. I'm a trauma surgeon at St. Charles. That's my actual job. Maureen's actual job is
I'm a PA in urgent care, and then I work for a medical education company.
and the only way that this is possible is we have Lynette. So this is Lynette's full-time job. So if it were not for Lynette, you would not have county medical examiners. I can tell you that right now. So she is what keeps the lights on in our office. She answers all the phone calls from law enforcement, from the funeral homes. And this is a relatively new position because Dr. Van Amberg was doing this full time. You can just sort of buzz through this stuff. This is just sort of who we are, what we do. Again, we are signing all the death certificates for accidental suicides, homicides, and other unnatural decedents in this county, just for a little bit of background information if anybody's interested in what the medical examiner actually does. Next slide. Keep going. So we have a team of 10 nurse investigators that go out to all of our calls. So they're covering, 3,000 square miles of Deschutes County and Crook County. So that's quite a few miles driven to go investigate cases. And that's also a large portion of our budget. So what is actually involved in a death investigation? So our nurses are going out, looking at the decedents, collecting relevant medical information, and then spending a lot of time on the phone and on the computer looking into individuals' past medical histories and all these sorts of things. They are averaging 4 to 6 hours per case, and they're occasionally driving, say they get a call in Lapine, but then they get a call up in Crook County, they're driving all day doing this. So this is on their day off from their regular job at St. Charles. So this is all sort of an ad hoc organization that we're running sort of as we can.
But you have 10 of them that you can circle in?
There are 10,
We're done at 8.
we're down to 8. We are actively looking to flesh out. Our schedule is most doable if there's 10 investigators on. The unique challenge of our office is that we are an independent contractor with you guys. So in speaking to some of the other county level medical examiners in Oregon, most of these types of offices are actually employed by the county themselves. So it would be a pathologist, which I am not, employed by the county, as well as nurse investigators, or sometimes they'll have their sheriff's deputies licensed to become these death investigator types. So the infrastructure in our county is very unique, especially for our size. The fact that we are a completely independently contracted organization with the county. We are really busy. I pulled numbers from even before when Dr. Van Amberg started. We are doing double the amount of case investigations that we were 10 years ago. We investigated, we get phone calls for 1,200 people that die a year in this county. And that's in addition to our contract with Crook. And we investigate 600 to 700 of those. So you can already sort of get a sense of how much legwork that is for our investigators and how many death certificates Maureen and I are signing. Furthermore, and probably the thing that Maureen and I are most dedicated to fixing, only one of our investigators is certified by the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators. That is the national organization that teaches individuals how to become death investigators. Over time, our people who have been certified are sort of just out of the pool or retired or doing less and less. So one thing that we really would like in our upcoming year's budget is funds to get people certified for this, so we can sort of be a little bit more official and a little bit more less on the job training for our new hires.
So kind of starting off the top here again, so the state is overwhelmed. Was there any legislative engagement, during the legislative session of the governor's office or anything? And you may not know this, but we've got a little bit of history where when an area gets up to 200, 250,000, the state might be there for us, but if they're going backwards instead of having resources.
Yeah, so there was I'll say pretty shocking email from the state ME's office and the Oregon State Police about the things that they are not going to be investigating anymore.
Yeah.
So it used to be that anybody who died of a suspected overdose would get an autopsy. They are not doing that in Oregon. So from Deschutes and Crook County, if there's a suspected overdose, all we do is send tox. So either a blood or a urine sample, and that goes to the lab, and that's a 6-month delay. So those families are receiving a pending death certificate until that toxicology comes back again 6 months later. But
Well, so that kind of gets back to the concept, and I want to be able to be a good advocate for what we're doing here, but the state's expectation of what they even think they want to do, as in, from the governor's office to the legislature to the ME's office. Is this the intention, or is there resources coming? As I say, you don't need to
right.
answer what you don't know here. I'm just letting this is what I'm trying to think about.
The state ME's office has said they on a state level are going to be investigating homicides and child and infant deaths, and that's about it. And everything else is going to follow the counties.
So we've got an Association of Oregon Counties, we've got legislators associated with Deschutes County. So my first thought is, what can we be advocating for at the legislature when it comes to resources and dollars, and maybe it's the emergency funds in the short session or even a special session. Emergency board. So I mean, there's things that we could advocate for right now, possibly.
The state ME's office needs more money for pathologists.
There we go.
That is the
answer
punchline.
right now.
They need the starting salary for the state ME office pathologist is abysmal compared to, say, a similar position in California. And I've spoken to a couple of colleagues who are forensic pathologists. That is the one reason they can't recruit here.
And then you mentioned 10's the actual number. We have 8 right now, and a contract with Crook County. So that 10 gets you kind of rounded out for Crook County also. I mean, because it's one.
Yeah, we sort of did an informal poll of our current investigators. When we're staffed at 10, that is a comfortable number of shifts for our team. It doesn't leave too many gaps.
How can we help you find the next 2 there?
But we got people banging our doors down to join our team, so
Okay.
that's not an issue, luckily. Yeah.
And Lynette, are you the certified?
No, I'm actually in the process of that right now.
Okay.
So I have some more training that I'm going to attend in Polk County as well. I have an aquatic death investigation coming up, or training along with suffocation as well and asphyxiation. So
Okay, so there's credential building for anybody associated with this too.
correct.
I'm trying to get to that.
So when did the state stop doing the drug overdose part of their?
Autopsies, that I don't know, it's been a while. It's almost certainly during COVID, I'm sure that had.
Okay, so it has been a while then.
Yep. Yep. And that includes these lens bias prosecutions as well. So lens bias prosecutions, for those who may not know, are when they believe that there is a drug overdose, they will go try to prosecute the individual who provided that drug. So they're not doing those autopsies anymore. Which I'm not a lawyer, but it sounds like that.
We do have a lawyer sitting in the room, so maybe they'll send us a message.
Can you explain how the relationship with Crook County works and the cost sharing between the two counties?
That's pretty ad hoc. We just have a separate, we are independent contractors with them also, and they just give us a monthly stipend. And so some of our funds will go out to those funeral homes, and a large part of our budget is paying the funeral homes for their expenses for transporting bodies to and from the state for an autopsy, for example. So we do sometimes have to dip into Deschutes County funds to support
So
some of
there's
that.
two separate accounts. There's one for Deschutes and Crook County. Any cases that come from Crook County are paid from Crook County, and the ones that come from Deschutes are Deschutes. Funds are not, we don't ask for funds in our budget for Deschutes County, if that makes sense. We deal with Crook
Yeah.
on that level.
But we occasionally use Crook County money for, say, our phone expenses.
Yes,
or-
correct.
Yep.
So with the state saying that they're not doing specific autopsies, there's still transports all over the place, or
There's
guys aren't even moving?
less of
Yeah.
that now,
Yeah.
certainly.
These two trends, sort of an increasing number of cases, volume of cases, and you know, the state pulling back on how much it's doing. Do you think that those have, those trends will continue, like there'll be, the volumes will continue to get even bigger, and that the state is gonna kind of keep pulling back farther and farther, or have we sort of leveled out?
I
on some
don't
of those things?
I don't have a background in epidemiology or population-based health statistics or anything like that. I would say my educated guess would be, as Deschutes County population continues to grow, and as we continue to have these sort of lifestyle plights, the houselessness issue, the drug issue, I can only see those numbers going up, and I can only see the state continuing to say, we just don't have the capacity to help with that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, so you're part of the way through yours, but I just wanted to say thank you very much for what you're doing. Let's acknowledge that right now. It's a response to a need, and thank you all for what you're doing. I'm thinking, okay, legislative ask resources for the state medical examiner's office at least, which is gonna help us out. So
Yeah.
with that, you can proceed or whatever.
Thank
So
you.
Thank you.
Next couple slides, we're almost done.
Yeah.
We've already covered. Next slide, please. Again, this is just the rationale for our increased budget. Maureen and we are just, the honest answer is we are too busy for this. I left the application open for this position for 12 weeks and nobody else applied. I was serving as Dr. Van Emberg's deputy, and I have a pathologic inability to say no. So that's why I'm the medical examiner for Deschutes County. But the truth of the matter is, between my main job at St. Charles and my family obligations, it is very difficult to do what I need to do for this position in a timely manner. We are doing our best. It is absolutely necessary for us to have a full-time person like Lynette doing this. If we didn't have the money in the budget for what Lynette needs, I would have to quit and walk away. So that is our main ask is help Lynette keep the lights on, help us compensate our investigators and their time, which is very valuable, and the cost of fuel, which is incredibly high, as you all know. And finally, we had been using personal devices for this, which is wildly inappropriate, and we went ahead and got our investigators their own phones and a separate phone plan. So that's another new expense from our previous cohort. Next slide, please. That's just the budget line item. And so, and just, in general, we are sort of in this nether region of being probably too big for a coroner system and definitely too small for having our own county level forensic pathologist. But something to keep in mind is that a medical examiner is a triple board certified specialty within pathology. I have none of that training. So it's kind of crazy, that this is what goes on in most of the counties in Oregon. Most of the counties are run on this, type of model. There's just that, few, forensic pathologists out there. It's a pretty wild situation, with pretty big implications for public health dollars, for, prosecution dollars and, important law enforcement, relationships. And, that is what I've learned in a year of doing this.
Yeah.
Well, what you've just said really makes sense. What I was told by the director of Best Care. This year, in 3 months, they had 7 people that they'd been working with overdosed and died. And he said, this was like 2 months ago, I think he told me, and he said, when will those numbers really show up? He goes, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So now what you're telling me, and I'd already heard that about the state, that they were clearly understaffed and underpaid, and it's a mess because it's so critical for crime and follow through. And if you don't realize you have an overdose death because of someone, you're like a year behind.
Yeah,
Where do you ever get that information?
it's been super frustrating. There's a lot of different county level organizations asking me for data on just that topic, which I can't provide. Because I can tell you this is a suspected overdose, but without data from the state lab, I can't tell you for sure.
And that will take at least 6 months?
At least, yeah.
6 to 8 months, and we still have some that are pending from 2022 that I've not received any, I guess, update on as well as toxicology.
You mentioned that there are some counties that will have a county employee in-house. And I'm trying to understand what the advantages, disadvantages, what the right size and type of county is to pursue that. Are you suggesting that might be something we should consider, or?
I think we're getting there. I think between Deschutes, Crook and Jefferson counties, I think we probably have enough of a population in Central Oregon to justify that. I know that there was an effort to sort of extend Dr. Van Amberg's jurisdiction up that way. I am in email contact with a couple of the county level medical examiners in Clackamas and Lynn County on the other, and just sort of the bigger places. And I haven't really fully sat down with them yet, but I suspect that we're at a level where our independent contract should be absorbed into the county. I would say so right now, the advantage for the county of having us be independent contractor is that we're providing you guys a full-time service without any job benefits or anything like that. So Lynette is our full-time employee, but the reason she needs more money is because she's on a 1099 and she can't live in this area on a 1099 salary without benefits. So that's a big ask. I think that if you were able to have a full-time employed position as a medical examiner, you wouldn't run into this thing where you're trying to get a trauma surgeon to do this in between OR cases, in between ER calls and stuff.
Did we, you recall, I mean, when we were working on crafting this RFP.
We did look at that option.
We did. That option.
Yeah, and most department, I mean, if it came to the county, it'd either be the sheriff's office or the health department.
Mhm.
And there are pros and cons of both of those options, as well as just pros and cons of bringing it in-house.
I believe most of them fall under the DA or work directly, like the DA has the budget for that, like in Lynn County, I was speaking to their department. And it falls under the DA, that they work with the DA, so that's where their budget comes from. And so there's like anywhere from 4 to 6 full-time employees. And then they have as what you would call somebody that is a on-call person or volunteers for backup. But most of them get their funds from the DA because they are part of the DA's office.
So in those cases, are the employees of the DA's office?
Correct, I believe so.
Like there's 3 options.
So, and as we look at rising costs for this contract. I don't know if we looked at dollars, kind of like a cost comparison of doing, these 2 alternative, and internal and external. But you know, if these trends continue, more cases, states doing less. It seems like over time that cost comparison is going to keep changing and there is a point where we wanna look seriously at this other model.
Yeah, I mean, cost is one thing, but there's other things to consider as well, and one is the independence. And the independent nature of the work is another element. And then also, if they became county employees, then it's following county policies and regulations. So there's that element too.
I think the job that it's currently taking Maureen and I both to handle would be an awesome job for a retired pathologist or retired physician. It's a very, if you had 15 hours a week to do it, it would be great for somebody in that position. And I think you could probably get away with less money for a person like that. I also think if these were full-time employees of Deschutes County, we would probably actually need fewer than 10 investigators if this was their job. I could, if it would be helpful, I could put together like a staffing model for what it would look like for a Deschutes County employee office.
I think, you know, and maybe that's something that we loop in HR to work with. To develop or.
I think that's down the road. I mean, the staffing model would be the last, or the staffing model would be helpful, but in terms of looping in HR, that would be the last piece of it. If the board wanted staff to further flush this out, I think looking at the elements of cost, independence, which department or office would it go to, are the items to start with.
Well, and I think of, if we, and thank you again for what you're doing, but, if we, the county say, oh, when we build our office off, the state's gonna be happy to hand it to us, right? So we're just taking on responsibilities that we may or may not be required to, as in, if the state has a medical examiner's office, they're understaffed, under capacity. If we help them out by paying for our local source resources, so I'm just saying there's balance and a game that we need to learn about there.
I think those are
Yeah.
two very good
Yeah,
points.
we could-
I think, Phil, to your point, or Mr. Chang, to your point, as the independent contract continues to grow, it's gonna get really expensive to do this from an independent contractor point of view. If we just need more, we need more miles, we need more nurses, we need more money to keep Lynette's lights on.
This is a critical service and we want to make sure that, you know, it's adequately covered, but.
Yeah.
But,
Well, it's just like, cause they're so busy. I mean, she's busy with her trauma job. She's busy with her 2 other jobs, is that, you know, I filled everything. Like right now, sitting here in this meeting, my phone is ringing 12 times. And so that's either you have the emergency department calling, you have 911 dispatch families, lawyers, the list goes on, funeral homes, and that's literally 12 times.
So, and we've got some good history here. We've studied it. Basically, last thing I think of is offering space, right? So you have an office here. How's that working?
That's a great
Hopefully it's
question.
not too
Do we-
funny, yeah.
so, do we have an office? Lynette.
So we are currently at the Lafayette building on the corner of Lafayette over here, which I think is a great aspect. It serves a great purpose as we continue to grow. You know, there is times that we do have to meet with families, or if Dr. Onishi needs to meet with a family, or Maureen needs to meet with a family, we have that privacy and that space to do so. However, I was told that that space no longer is going to belong to us because it's going to get tore down and it's going to go into parking. So then we were suggested to go to a different area, which I do not feel is perfectly, is appropriate for the community that we serve and the area that it's at. I don't believe that it's appropriate.
What Lynette's referring to is we've been offered space in Redmond, almost all of
Yeah, that
our.
was a policy choice that we were partnered a year ago, so the message was different.
Yeah, I think, so before we came on, Dr. Van Amberg's was basically running this outfit out of her hangar at the airport.
We heard about that.
Which was awesome. I wish I had a hangar, but all of our investigators live here or in La Pine, basically. So we stock supplies and everything needed for death investigations in our office. So to have folks running up to Redmond to get their needles and that's gonna add to miles.
Yeah, so as I say, from my experience as a board of commissioners member, last we heard Redmond was gonna be a good choice when we get the building redeveloped. So now the message is different today, you know, so.
Yeah, I
this is why
hate
we're
to,
communicating,
I
yeah.
hate to turn the corner on you, but something in Ben would be great. And actually, if we were gonna start thinking about pairing more with the Department of Public Health, their building right across from the hospital would be awesome for our RNs to just pop in and get their supplies.
And they just, and we just, we're in the process of signing a lease for a larger building
Yeah.
for our health services expansion. out there.
We need a closet, we need a desk, we need a fax machine and a printer. We don't need a giant.
That's all you really need? You mean like 200, 300 square feet?
Yeah, if that, yeah.
Because we do have a little building to provide. You know, I know we're gonna use that for parking, but I mean,
That's what they're at, yeah.
you guys are inside that little.
That's my
building
little
right now?
house. Yeah, that's our tiny little
Which
house.
is a great location.
Mhm.
Yeah, the location is terrific, but you can't tell you're there because I've walked by it several times.
We don't really work there during the day. It's just, it's our our central repository for supplies and where our faxes end up and. Because most of our job is out and about.
Okay, so over by the hospital would be handy.
That would be, I think our RNs would love that. Our nurses would love that.
Well, I would think maybe the building is big enough that they could find you a couple of hundreds.
I think Christie and, I think Christie and Brittany have been working on some things, so.
It's
Okay.
relationship.
Get them out of
Well,
Redmond.
we
huh?
had today, so,
Always, yeah.
we're not quite ready to.
Yeah.
Commit to some big changes just on the fly. But, yeah, as I say, I mean, it does boil down to thank you for keeping this together. It's interesting to hear about the state medical examiner's office, which way it's going. I can definitely, and we can all offer the state level feedback, you know, to whoever might be listening. Association of Oregon Counties, we are in that kind of medium size and growing county, unique from other counties in the state of Oregon. So this helps really put scope on what's going on.
Just for the board, there's no board action today, it's more of a information, and then based on this new request, the contract will be modified. I think it's within Nick's signature authority, so it won't come back to the board. And then in terms of the budget, you know, it's no longer part of the budget process, it's the contract is the funding mechanism. You know, it started with it being paid out of the DA's office, and then it was moved, the budget itself was moved out of the DA's office. So there used to be kind of an update and an ask to the budget committee, but really we're transitioning to the contract, and then county staff submit the appropriate budget to support that contract.
I mean, I would like us, you know, I think we should commit to doing some analysis on this external versus internal structure question and also commit to exploring other office space opportunities besides that you know, up in Redmond, but
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely the space, you know, I think under Dr. Van Amber, she liked the space, but now that doesn't work.
I think also her, isn't Dan from Redmond? Her admin,
Oh, she might have been.
yeah, her, her admin was from Redmond also, which.
So that's the big takeaway, because I mean, it was like, oh, we have this building, we just spent millions of dollars purchasing and
Yeah, I know, I
redeveloping.
heard, sorry.
other people will want that spaces.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, there's always.
I think we've already
space for
transitioned
years.
it to
Yeah,
something else, so that's not a problem.
we don't have a hang, so.
Thank you for your time and thank you for listening to us and,
Great.
we're doing our
Thank you
best.
for what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for the important service you're providing for our community around your other jobs.
I see our district attorney is here. Are you here for this purpose? Did you want to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to be here to support
Great.
Dr. Oishi and her requests and answer any questions if you have them. This team is very critical to what we do and what law enforcement does here in Deschutes County.
Thank you. Steve, do you have, or I mean, some of my fellow commissioners or county staff have this. But I'd just be curious about a little bit about the history of the movement of this function out of the DA's office back in the day.
Yeah, it used to be that the DA was responsible for overseeing the budget, and probably Eric knows that history, or the history of why it moved out better than I do. I think it was probably just to keep the lines cleaner.
Yeah, and I think it's a request out of the DA's office because it came across as if there was a request to increase the budget out of the ME, would that compete against the DA's request for supplemental items?
Right, but we do work very closely together still, and I know like Jessica Chandler in my office reviewed this request and gave it her stamp of approval, which means a lot to me. And I've reviewed it and it looks completely appropriate to me as well. And you know, what Dr. Onishi and her team do is really a huge lift that can't really be explained. But the number of death calls that we get in this county is overwhelming. And to have, you know, Dr. Onishi and 8 deputy medical examiners responsible for all of those calls going out to hundreds, 700, 800 calls
Last year, yeah.
a year that's really something. I've interacted with this team in one form or another at every murder investigation, every manslaughter investigation, some that seemed suspicious but ended up not being. And all of those things take expertise and time, and they're extremely valuable to Deschutes County and public safety. That's why I'm here.
Yep, thank you so much. So then how do we get back to 10? You said 8 to 10.
We have
People
one.
that are interested in doing that.
We have one RN who's currently in the process of shadowing to see if this is something that she's interested in. It's not for everyone.
Yep.
As you can imagine. So, and then I have 3 or 4 email resumes in my inbox as we speak.
Let them
So,
come around and then.
Yep.
And so then there is more resource ask here, which we'll talk about through the contract.
Yep. So
Yeah.
finding
Back to the board, it'll just be handled administratively.
the people to do it is not so hard, but again, I would really like to get everybody certified by the ABMDI. And then while I have you guys, if I may, as a trauma surgeon and as the medical examiner, I have a vested interest in getting the teenagers on e-bikes thing under control.
According to the Uber driver I used last week, he said it's absolutely crazy. E-bikes, they go everywhere. He goes,
Yeah.
it is so frightening. He goes, only if you see someone with a helmet on and bike shorts, do you know that you can perhaps know that they're gonna do the right thing? So I did pass that on to Megan Perkins was here and I said, and Eric King said the same thing.
And I know there was a
People are
meeting.
driving crazy.
And part of it, as a cyclist and a driver, cyclists either need to be on the bike.
Yep.
Acting like a
A car
vehicle, or off the bike, walking the bike, acting like a pedestrian. But when I know that the danger is both ways, but when cyclists act like a pedestrian, that's also where people aren't used to it.
I think a large problem too is I've got a middle schooler and the number of e-bikes at that middle school for people under 16 years old who do not understand the rules of the road as a driver, let alone, on an e-bike. It's like a video game driving up that road to, Pacific Crest or Miller, because there are kids on these e-bikes blasting down the sidewalk.
And going uphill
And-
too, that's it. When you're a driver, you don't expect this acceleration next to you
Yeah.
when you're driving.
Weaving in and out of the sidewalk and the road and no helmets and 3 kids on it and.
So please help us
Crazy.
do less work in urgent care and the trauma
There
center
you
and
go.
sign death
That's what they
certificates.
did.
So
We already
it
did.
seems like the big action is gonna happen at the city level
Okay.
and also at the state legislature level.
Okay.
So, that's why Representative Levy and Mayor Pro Tem Perkins organized that roundtable. And we, the county doesn't have jurisdiction over city streets.
Yep.
So, and, we don't, the county sheriff, is doing
County
the
sheriff
Sheriff's
things.
office
Yep.
is doing the work outside of the incorporated cities, so it does, when I was invited to that roundtable and when I walked in, or as I was thinking, I was preparing for it, I just had to note how many issues I had heard about outside, in the unincorporated county, and it's not.
Yep.
So I think that's when it would trigger some county work on this issue is if there's a lot of issues outside of the incorporated cities. I do think that Representative Levy and Councilor Perkins, they've got, they really want to do some serious work on this.
Good, that's good to hear.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you
Have
all.
a great
Thank you
day.
very much. Yeah. Thank you.
Item number 3. rural accessory dwelling unit legislative amendment. So this is work session in preparation for the hearing on that.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Kyle Collins with the County Planning Division. As the Chair pointed out, this is a work session and prep for a public hearing on Wednesday regarding our proposed rural ADU amendments. We've gone through a couple different iterations of this. I'm not going to go into all the details right now. I'd rather sort of leave it open to you to ask me questions because there's a lot of ground to cover, and obviously a lot of it will come up during the hearing itself. We started all this process though to bring everybody up to speed last fall, proposed some draft amendments to the board and sent that to our planning commission. Due to some conflicts in the administering state legislation, which was Senate Bill 391, we placed everything on pause after that initial public hearing with the planning commission, waiting on action at the state level. That ultimately occurred in May of this year. Senate Bill 644 was passed, which removed that conflicting language from Senate Bill 391 and allowed us to move forward as a local jurisdiction. And so we had to tweak some of the original language that we proposed based on that new bill, as well as some advice from county legal counsel regarding clear and objective standards for residential code. So with all those new changes put in place, the board wanted us to go back before the planning commission for another work session to get some updated recommendations if there were any. We did that on July 13th. Those recommendations are included in your packet today, as well as for the hearing on Wednesday. There are a number of changes, some of which are very technical in nature, as I pointed out. So those clear and objective standards and advice from county legal counsel, those are included, as well as more straightforward changes related to updates in the Senate bill language. I also have.
We kind of think of this as practicing to put clear and objective standards in our code.
Yeah, I think so. This was definitely the first big set of amendments that we had, in addition to some of the things that were come up. And the wildlife overlay updates, those similar types of language were included. A lot of this is more related to what I would call things like safe access for firefighting equipment, trying to come together with what might be clear and objective in those regards. The basic template we utilized for most of this regarding clear and objective was to build a very prescriptive set of standards initially. So numbers on a page, if you meet these numbers, then he said you've met whatever that particular standard is. But for almost all of those, we've included another discretionary standard, which is if you can go talk to, let's say, your fire service protection provider and they give the sign off that you met the standard, then that also qualifies you. So you have two possible options. Last thing that I'll say before opening up to questions is Todd Cleveland's here today. There were a number of questions that came up during the last planning commission discussion regarding staff's recommendation for an increase in the size limitations in southern Deschutes County related to groundwater impacts there and possible implications of increasing density overall. So if you have more technical and specific questions related to that.
So on that topic, the map that's in this package that shows exception area, southern Deschutes.
This is for the eligibility possibility.
Yeah, so the highlighted meeting criteria, is that 5 acres or 2 acres on this map?
Let's see, I don't know.
I guess maybe all these maps would be the same question.
I'm not sure that was a map that I included. I'm not.
Yeah, so it's just, when I looked at this, I thought, oh, is it 5 or 2? For sure.
That's not a map that I included as part of our.
But maybe this is a different map, but. That's, as I say, when I look at that, I wasn't sure.
The maps that I've included, there's a number of them spread out. One are the inventory site maps associated with our Goal 5 area. That's as a part of our EC analysis in the staff report. The other map that I've included is a potential eligibility map. So it basically took all the criteria from both of the Senate bills, including, it did not include the 5 acre minimum in that eligibility map because it was intended to just be a description of what the state standards were, to give you a sense of where properties in the county that might be eligible for.
So one other feedback item maybe, so in the EC analysis, I see the economic consequences in some of the paragraphs, and it's referenced a few times, but one of the scenarios I'm seeing is baby boomer retirement, retirees, older population, high-speed internet, people working from home and home delivery. I mean, there's like a whole scenario in here that I'd probably like to see at least a couple sentences on. You know, because it kind of talks about traditional, somebody might leave for a job in the morning and drive home at night. There's a whole set of people that may not leave for a job as much either. So I don't know if that ever came up, but if there's time, if the EC is still a work product that can be edited.
It is, so just for everybody's kind of reference here, the EZ is not intended as kind of a final end all be all. It's really a decision-making tool
Yeah,
for
good, yes.
you as county commissioner. So
As I say, there's just some words in there, because say high-speed internet, home delivery, perfect people working from home is a scenario that's here. It's in our hands now, and we see it. When you talk to people like, oh yeah, I just work from home now. And we don't know what the future brings, but it's not traditional. It's not standard that we've seen historically in the last 100 years as much.
Kyle, I have a question then. When you say that there are 1,123 lots in South County, is that just the regular 2 acre?
it's based on the 2 acre.
That's a 2, okay, because comes out to like 9,400.
It's about, if we were to take staff's original recommendation to the 5 acres, I believe that number goes down to somewhere around 380, something like
380,
that.
okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And then I did talk to Peter this morning because I was wondering, because I'm from Morrow County where they've got the Boardman nitrate issue. What's going on with DEQ and studying the wells in South County? And Peter said that I could hear from that. Yeah, I just really would, it feels like we should have had this done like 2 years ago or something, because of COVID. I just feel like what's happening.
So, Todd Cleveland with the onsite wastewater program. I've talked to the lab, so the DEQ lab is kind of managing that sampling event. They sampled in the spring. They're still processing those samples. Part of that is quality assurance. I haven't heard or seen anything about that data yet. Based on what the lab told me last time I talked to them, is they were expecting, maybe at the end of August, they would have some of that data that they could provide to us. DEQ has been short on hydrologists as well. So there's not a lot of people that can look at that and talk about the model. The groundwater sampling history and put it all together from that perspective. So there are people there that do that, but they have a lot of other responsibilities as well. So they're working on another sampling event in October. And in that event, we've had discussions about monitoring wells. So there's about 200 monitoring wells that were installed, constructed during the Lapine demonstration project. So we have a lot of data associated with those from the Lapine demonstration project, basically the early 2000s. Thousands of data points. Most of those had nitrates in them. So it would be interesting to see how that's developed over time. And that's part of what the discussions are. I don't know what wells they are. I've been providing my input as possible because I'm the person that's still around that was actually out there doing that. So everybody else is retired. So
That'll be you someday.
it will be eventually. But trying to help pick which ones to do, which ones are accessible. Some are in the right of way, and that was done intentionally so that we would have access to them without having to get permission from property owners. However, DEQ is really good at getting permission to resample wells that they've sampled in the past for property owners. Property owners want to know what their water level, water chemistry is, right? The water they're drinking every day. Most likely it's, much like what we've seen in the past is what I expect to see is a small trend of increases, but overall maybe more wells impacted, but not a huge number of them at dangerous levels, but don't really know. That's based on what the USGS predictions were, is it's going to take decades to see this be more widespread. I think newer wells are being drilled deeper for a number of reasons, from getting into better water and the fact that the water levels have been dropping in some areas, right? So the need for good productive wells, I've heard from several people how much they've spent drilling their wells deeper.
So you'll hear something maybe at the end of August?
That's what the head of the lab told me.
Okay, good.
So we'll have some preliminary data there. There'll be additional data. We'll probably be able to look at it again sometime in 2024, where it's all put together. From DEQ, hopefully, with some understanding of that information.
But I've got a, well, map in my office from 10 years ago, and it started in 95, I think, with some of the first data points that have been able to be correlated like 3 and 4 and 5 times. This may be the 4th or 5th time now, so it'd be very interesting.
Yes,
So will you be able to share with us then after August when you're here?
I guess it depends on what DEQ gives me permission to talk about, I guess, or how to talk about it, because I don't want to misrepresent what they're providing to me, but I think so. I think I'll be able to do that.
One of the things I was interested in learning more about or better understanding. I understand that there will be limits on additional dwellings beyond an ADU on a property, but one of the things that a number of people have asked me about is other accessory buildings, kind of like how they combine or don't combine or limit each other. And could you unpack that up for us a little bit? Is, if you're allowed to build an accessory building and you're allowed to build an accessory dwelling unit that only has 900 feet of usable space, but it might make more sense for you to put your accessory building and your accessory dwelling unit together, then I'd just like to understand how we can, essentially give people the opportunity to build everything that they're eligible to build, working with, but set regulations to honor the legislative intent.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as the code is drafted right now, there's nothing that prohibits the builder of an accessory dwelling unit from all the accessory components that would be associated with a primary dwelling. So if you have a primary dwelling on a piece of art and property in the county, say, you could build a detached garage associated with that use, and it has all the normal functions of a detached garage. So it's generally not intended to be habitable area in some cases. You can still have plumbing and a bathroom associated with all those things. And those same types of uses could be potentially associated with an accessory dwelling. So outside of lot coverage standards and setbacks and sort of the normal land use provisions, there's nothing that stops someone from building something like a garage itself. And the actual implementation of that is primarily from the Building Safety Division and what types of permits they're actually issuing for these structures themselves. So they have different permits for inhabitable spaces, non-inhabitable spaces, et cetera, and those same types of delineations would apply. So if you build, in this case, your 900 square foot ADU, directly next door to it, you could build a detached garage structure under the current way that the code is drafted with no real limitations, again, outside of those building safety conditions.
But it would be required to be separate.
It would have to be separated though, yes. We did define, so one of the provisions that came from the original Senate bill is the ADUs are limited to 900 square feet of usable floor area. And I know we went into a little bit of this with the Planning Commission and the board previously. Unfortunately, they didn't define for us what that is. And so we've kind of had to rack our brains and come up with what we think would both meet the statutory provisions as well as kind of allowing people to build things that a lot of people want, primarily accessory components, garage spaces, et cetera. And so the way we've defined usable floor area as part of the local code is Anything in between the exterior insulated walls of your structure that's primarily used for living quarters. But it's exclusive of accessory components like garages. So if you had an attached garage to your ADU, the way it's currently defined is that would not count towards that 900 square feet of living area. That help answer your question?
It does. So for an accessory building, you know, other accessory component, are there space or dimension constraints? You know, if you're gonna build a detached garage for your primary dwelling, is there a restriction on how big that?
There are separation distance requirements from the building safety division, but dimensional standards, again, outside of, we do have lot coverage standards countywide. So you're only allowed to cover a certain percentage of your property in structures of any type. But as long as everything falls within that, and again, meets the standards of, let's say, your property line setback requirements, your setback distances from, let's say, wells, that's another thing that comes up very frequently, wastewater disposal systems and separation between buildings themselves. You meet all that, there's no limitations on detached accessory structures.
So, you know, conceivably, a primary residence could have a really, really big detached garage, and the 900 square foot ADU could also have like a three-port garage attached to it as well.
Correct. And there's no limitation, I'll point out, just in general, in the numbers of accessory buildings that you're allowed to build. And again, let's say your classic rural residential exception area. So if you want to build 5 garages, you can build 5 garages, again, as long as you're not superseding the lot coverage standards and all the other setback requirements, et cetera. Thank you.
So at the EC, just another wording thing, it's just kind of thoughts, page 28. About 43, that talks about. Social consequences, the second paragraph, bottom half, talk about adding a limitation requiring an entire ADU to be within 100 feet of the existing dwelling or others could establish a negative consequence of ADUs in rural areas, inadequate access to employment, schools, food, markets, medical facilities, parks. So I guess just when I read and parks, from my point of view, you know, these are more rural properties, different than a city. So putting parks in there just kind of jumped out at me. Just talking about words on a page here.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Kyle, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director, as acknowledged by Kyle, Mr. Chairman, the easy analysis is not a fixed document. It can be modified, and I don't want to be presumptuous. The board's holding a public hearing on Wednesday, and at some point we'll deliberate and make a recommendation. As what I would offer for context, as you and the other commissioners see aspects of the findings report, or if you find that you want to change some of the code language, you can direct staff to update the findings and bolster the easy
It's
analysis.
just for discussion.
Exactly. So I just wanted to give you the thought and the perspective that the feedback that you're giving us now, the time for ultimately Kyle to incorporate that into an updated findings report that would be part of an ordinance as an exhibit, is when the board's deliberating, making a recommendation. Staff would then, in coordination with legal counsel, bring back a.
So I think this is, you know, what hat am I wearing? Because I'm reading this, I'm thinking, and parks. It's like, you know, these are MUA 10, RR 10, rural properties. You know, pretty much most folks in southern Deschutes County, if you're gonna go to the park, that means finding the public river access, or, you know, so, or getting just out to, you know, the Newbury Monument, which is federal land. So I just the terminology, the way it read, it sounded like you're in the city, walking to your city park, and it's just the mindset of what we're talking about here is the rural. This is already rural.
I mean, there are, you know, all the state parks, Tumalo.
Yeah.
The Line and Smith Rock. I mean, there's a substantial amount of rural property around those.
Yep. And as I say, I mean, as a Southern Deschutes County resident, there's some people that will get up and drive to the state park, but mostly it's people come from around the state of Oregon or the West Coast, renting a night at the state park in the summertime. So it's just different than a park. It's just a mindset thing. That's all I was referring to. A city park for youth recreation is different than a state park. You know, there's people that get up, ride their bikes from their house to the state park to go through trails. There's not as many proportionate as a city.
But I also wanted to ask what we figured out about addressing vacation occupancy. So I mean, the legislation is pretty clear. You cannot use the ADU itself for short-term rental.
Correct.
But you know, I am really concerned about the scenario where someone builds a very nice ADU, maybe with an enormous shop or garage attached to it, and then moves in there as their primary, you know, makes that their primary residence, and short-term rentals the other unit, the original primary residence, which, you know, leaves us net with no additional workforce housing or other housing opportunities. So do we have any way to address that possibility?
Great question again. That is something, so just to refer to the initial draft, which is the set of amendments to all the commissioners have today. We just left it as a state statutory requirement, which is that the ADU itself can't be used for vacation rentals. And they have a set of criteria and how they define that. There's 3 big points that you have to hit. It's length of occupancy, and then the other one is it your primary residence or not, is essentially what it boils down to. However, the planning commission, as you'll see in the recommendation packet on both occasions, each recommended that if a party were allowed to construct an ADU, one of the requirements would be a prohibition on both units established on site being prohibited from vacation occupancy. Ultimately, that's up to the commissioners to make their determination and whether or not they take that recommendation into consideration.
Have we had any feedback about, is that taking a right of way that's currently there? Except to that primary dwelling?
Yeah, so I think it's one of those things, again, it would be a slightly different consideration. Some of this is probably a question best answered by legal counsel, but in this instance, because it is an allowance someone's voluntarily signing on for at the expense of, I want to build my ADU. And in that case, then I lose my right to utilize my dwelling as a short-term rental, because they're voluntarily, again, agreeing to give up.
Okay, yeah, so that would be a choice, the policy choice is, if you want this, you would
get
get
this.
that. So, okay, that helps understand what we do. Good, thank you.
I mean, and it is a choice. You are getting a new development right, a new
In
development
exchange
opportunity.
for this, correct.
Good, so public hearing.
That recommendation from the planning commission is, it's part of our matrix. We'll consider that.
Correct. Yep, that was one of the big points that was discussed at both discussions with the planning.
So my one other question, if you have a question. My one other question is about, I read the staff note, I didn't fully track the way that defensible space standards are gonna work in the interim and I mean, I think I understand how they're gonna work in the long term, but you know, how they're going to work in the interim.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that Senate Bill 644 didn't address in their amending language is defensible space. They did add new language dealing specifically with fire hardening building code standards, but they left it open-ended as to how counties would like to deal with defensible space movements, if any at all, in this interim period before the state wildfire hazard maps are ultimately released. Based on that, we kind of in coordination with legal counsel came up with 2 frameworks. Again, we have the clear and objective standard, which is based on a set of treatments that comes directly out of our forest zone code. So we essentially took the forest zone code and stuck it into the ADU chapter and said, if there's no maps that are available, you're required to meet all of these treatment standards in association with the ADU itself. As a secondary alternative to that, let's say you either can't or don't want to meet those standards, there's a more discretionary option that says, if you go talk to whoever your fire service provider is, service protection provider is, they give you a set of actions that you can accomplish, and that meets defensible space. We would also accept that as a defensible space treatment option. And that's all something that would happen presumably at the time that you're applying. Either you're agreeing that you're going to meet our initial prescribed standards, or if you're giving us some set of treatments that your fire service protection officials gave you.
Then the wildlife area combining zone, that's basically an on-off switch for anybody that's in that area, correct?
Correct. So the draft amendments, again, don't make any discussion of the wildlife area combining zone. One of the discussions that did come up before both sets of the planning commission in this case was whether or not to allow those in the WA combining zone at all, with additional limitations, whatever that happened to be. And as you can see in the recommendations matrix, each time they elected to, or they recommended to not allow ADUs in these wildlife area combining zone. A lot of that was based on testimony from ODF and W and others related to essentially increased overall density in these areas, causing additional displacement of wildlife. But again, that's at the discretion of the commission.
Okay, public hearing on Wednesday.
Yeah, and then my last question would
Oh,
be
I'm sorry.
timelines for, so we'll have this public hearing. And then what does it look like from that point forward in terms of, finalizing regulations and offering people ADU opportunities?
That's a great question. A lot of it, there's a lot of contingencies, so it's hard to give a definitive answer. The first set of contingencies is following the hearing on Wednesday. Does the board want to leave written record open? That obviously is going to extend the timeline. Do you want to continue the hearing? That would extend the timeline. But assuming, let's just say the most expeditious written record is closed, and then we're just moving forward with a deliberation date, I would assume it would take about 2 weeks. So that staff can kind of compile everything, additional testimony that we had, and package all that for the board. So let's assume we would have deliberations 2 weeks following the hearing. Once they make their decision there, you could potentially sign off on whatever your final decision is. And then if it were adopted, we'd have another 2-week delay before you could have a secondary signature on an adopting ordinance. And then typically it's 90 days after that signature that it would become effective. So sometime at the end of the year is, again, under that most expeditious.
This wouldn't be subject to the emergency adoption waiver of the 90 days.
It certainly could. The one thing that I wanted to supplement with Kyle is just, we don't want to be presumptuous with the board, but if the board finds themselves in a position where they've recommended during deliberations, the adoption of the ordinance, what I would like our staff to do, and I suspect the board could consider adoption by emergency because of the importance of taking advantage of this opportunity. What's paramount for staff is that we have, and Kyle has been diligently working with Todd, with legal counsel, with our building official. We want to make sure we have a website up, that we have information available so that when there's an ordinance that's brought back for adoption, and let's just say hypothetically it's being considered for emergency, we have a program in place that is allowing interested property owners or investors to know how they should perform their due diligence before buying a piece of property. There's a lot of elements. One of them is pertaining to septic system and authorization permits. So thankfully, CDD with Kyle's leadership, we've been coordinating internally, but I want that information to be on our website with maybe a press release that explains what the process is if, for those that are interested, to ensure that their existing property or a potential property is suitable for a rural ADU. And so under this hypothetical, again, I'm not trying to be presumptuous, I could see us coming back after the board deliberates, if they recommend adoption, us coming back in several weeks to ensure that we have all this program ready to go, it's live, so that when the board's ready to adopt the ordinance, potentially by emergency, we have the ability to go live with information so that members of the public can understand how to perfect this or not perfect, but how to ensure that their properties or any investment property is capable of handling a real ADU. What we don't want is someone to make some assumptions and only to find out that there's complexities with the underlying property.
Well, even the basics, resource land or non-resource land, right?
Exactly.
It's not for EFU.
Exactly.
Septic system may be functioning, but it may trigger an upgrade, maybe a big deal. System development charge
It's
for
expensive.
transportation, yeah, it's expensive. System development charge for transportation, whatever that's gonna be, so even getting to an approval path could be expensive.
Right, and again, one of the ways we could go around, and I'm sensitive not being presumptuous, speaking on behalf of the board, but another thing, we'll work with the board so that. I know in the past, I think the board has adopted ordinances in 30 days under some cases. We might find, hey, we're ready to come back with an ordinance under this hypothetical. Make the adoption in 30 days, which gives us the ability, and we'll have the systems in place so we can spread the word. So we're very cognizant, and again, Kyle deserves and the managers and our colleagues and team within CDD a ton of credit, because we know how important this issue is for the board, and we want to make sure we have information for the public so they can make informed decisions.
And then let's not forget the illegal ADUs that could perhaps be on this type of property and actually fit all the parameters that can be made legal.
Correct.
And so that those ADUs could go into use for workforce housing.
Correct.
I know there are a few of them out there. And then Kyle, if the map on the very last page is done per the 5 acres South County, it looks like there's 322 in South County that are 5 acres or more.
That sounds right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
knew it was in the 300.
Yeah, I just did my little calculation,
Yeah.
I checked it. So anyway, no, that's good to know. I think 5 acres makes a lot of sense and will especially be no more when we get that DEQ notification, or at least Todd gets it, right?
Correct.
And then Todd can either be smiling or looking worried, and then we'll know that no, 5 acres doesn't cut it either. Todd, you have to be neutral in this, right?
Poker face. Well, I mean, groundwater protection is serious business, I mean, we all want 800%. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's it, anything else?
See you.
Looks like
See you on Wednesday.
And of course, greater sage grouse. Sage grouse, 2033 map here.
Brenda, could you promote me to a panelist? All right.
Welcome, hello.
Thank you. Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardello, Senior Planner with Deschutes County Community Development. Just getting re-logged in here so I can share my PowerPoint with you. But as I'm doing that, I wanted to share hot off the presses, a map that we'll be discussing today. So.
Had people who were interested in this item contacting me from the public.
Oh,
So this is the map that you shared with us, those extra maps that you shared with us. Over the weekend, maybe, well, wait, not this one, the additional attachment findings.
yes, the findings document.
This map wasn't anywhere in any events that.
Correct.
Will this become part of the public record for? this?
Yes, yeah, I'll provide a copy to Brenda following the meeting.
Because yeah, I think people will be very interested in some maps.
Absolutely, yeah. So we'll dig into the maps in just a moment, but I wanted to just provide a little bit of context for the board. So I'm here today to talk to you a little bit in an informational update about ODF&W's update to their sage grouse mapping project. So this began in 2010 when sage grouse was identified as a candidate species through the Endangered Species Act by US Fish and Wildlife. And through that process in 2011, ODF&W updated their conservation assessment and strategy, otherwise known as a CAS, and associated habitat maps, and adopted those through their Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission. During that process, they were able to actually define and delineate important habitats for sage grouse to ensure ongoing health of the species. And through that process, they also outlined several approaches for coordination between federal and private landowners, because the area in which sage grouse inhabit is an area that's made up of quite a composite of federal and non-federal lands. So under the direction of Governor Kitzhaber in 2015, the Land Conservation and Development Commission adopted rules in OAR 660-23-115, which is the administrative rule pertaining to Goal 5 wildlife resources. And through that, they established regulations specifically for sage grouse that establish 3 habitat areas, those being core, low density, those are kind of the most important to health of the species, and then general habitat, which is kind of more of a migration area, but not necessarily as important for breeding grounds within 3.1 miles of a lek or their strutting grounds during their mating season. So through that process, they did require 7 Eastern Oregon counties, Deschutes County was one of them, to implement the rules in that OAR. So this was a directive from the state that the county did have to move forward in implementing these rules to prevent conflict with large-scale development. In 2015, the county fulfilled its obligations to implement these rules locally through our creation of the sage grouse combining zone, which is an area that's primarily in eastern Deschutes County near Brothers, Milliken, and Hampton, and covers a variety of federal and non-federal land, but of the non-federal land, most of it is zoned exclusive farm use with the exception of one property that's split zone with forest use. So development in that area was already pretty limited since it was zoned EFU, but this added just some additional regulations in the case that there was a large scale development proposal, something like, I'll give the example of like a solar farm, an energy facility, something like that. Since the combining zone was established, we haven't seen many development proposals in that area of the county. We have had a couple pre-application meetings, but overall haven't seen many development proposals that come in that may conflict with that rule or need to work with ODF&W to comply with that rule. So turning it over to the ODF&W update process, this was initiated by ODF&W in March of 2022 and is a formal update to their conservation assessment strategy, which also includes an update to the mapped habitat areas with much more detailed information that they've gathered over the last 12 years, including data from GPS and satellite collars that were placed on sage grouse. So they were able to identify specific lek sites and update their models for kind of an updated data set to improve these maps. On July 10th, these maps were released to the general public and partner agencies like the county with the purpose of September 22nd, 2023 deadline for comments. So they are seeking comments on these maps from partner agencies and from the general public.
So tell me about, you said this is hot off the press. Is this the July 10th map with the county's logo on it?
That's a great question. So the July 10th information that was released was for the state of Oregon overall. So it was at like a 20,000 foot view. So we asked ODF&W for the actual GIS layers so that we could do analysis with tax lot information so that we could analyze the acres impacted, which I'll present to you a little bit later. So we created this map on July 20th, so last Thursday. Tim Berg acted pretty quickly
With the state's information.
with the state's information, with the heavy disclaimer from the state that this is a draft map. So keep that in mind. Yeah. So where this is heading is that ODFW is collecting those comments with the deadline of September 22nd, and they'll plan to bring any suggested revisions or any comments with them for their review of the updated maps and conservation assessment strategy in December 2023, which is when the Oregon Fish and Wildlife Commission will be reviewing it. If adopted by that commission, then this would go on to the Land Conservation and Development Commission, because the sage-grouse habitat map is an exhibit to that rule, OAR 660-23-115. So they'd consider updating that map. And if adopted, then this would lead to implementation at the county level, since it is required for the county to implement that rule with an update to the county's greater sage-grouse combining zone. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the changes in the map. So this is the map that you have in front of you. As I mentioned previously, again, ODFW utilized much more specific data in this mapping exercise rather. So you'll see that an area that was once labeled sage-grouse general habitat, it's the very faint yellow closest to the city of Bend, that has been removed because they were able to hone in on the specific core area and low density sites that general habitat area was essentially no longer needed or outdated information. Additionally, overall, we're seeing a general decrease in the habitat area. So it's a reduction in the total size by about 26,573 total acres. And that includes both federal and non-federal lands. We say non-federal because there's still some state-owned properties that may be under the jurisdiction of Deschutes County, but we wanted to disaggregate federally owned lands since they are not subject to our land use review or development review process. So of the non-federal land in the habitat boundary, we are seeing a modest decrease in the amount of tax lots included in the boundary. So about 176 will be essentially 176 reduction in the number of properties. And then in terms of acres, we are seeing a slight increase. So you'll see on the map, there's a bit of a shift of the core and low density areas. And in working with Tim Berg, our GIS analyst, it appears that that's attributed to some properties being added in that are maybe under one entity for ownership, but are just larger in acreage. So slight increase. Some other observations. So 70 non-federal properties are being remapped from low density to core habitat. So that's about 13,604 acres that will be subject to slightly more extensive rule for large scale development. And about 32 non-federal properties are remapped from core to low density. So about on the inverse, about 3,626 acres will be subject to slightly less extensive rules for large scale development. Additionally, overall, and looking at the map for the core area, it looks like the Hampton core habitat was reduced by about a third in size. There was a slight expansion east of Hampton, kind of on the county line near the Cougar Well area. And Brothers, the core area was expanded to the north and west and northeast, but a slight reduction was seen in the southeast and southwest. And for the low density habitat areas, in Hampton, the boundary shifted east and covers generally kind of more area surrounding Hampton. And Brothers and Milliken, similarly for low density habitat, reduction of low density area near Brothers, and a slight reduction near Horse Ridge in the Badlands area. So what this means for Deschutes County, I just wanted to re-emphasize that this is a bit different than our other local inventories. So I'll use the example of, say, mule deer. That was an inventory that was adopted by Deschutes County with specific regulations pertaining to Deschutes County. This, on the other hand, is coming from the state level down, and we are required to implement it. So we unfortunately cannot opt out or amend the regulations. Really, we are required to implement the rule that's in place today and the maps once and if they are adopted. We do have the opportunity to provide comments within certain parameters. ODFW has provided kind of an FAQ on this, but essentially they're not allowing for what they call donut holes, where one property is just exempt, and there would need to be biological justification associated with any comments for removal of a property from the map. And next steps, so staff is closely in contact with ODFNW. They are planning an open house in the Brothers area tentatively for the second week of August. So staff is planning to attend that meeting and we'll make the board aware of that meeting date and time once we receive it. And we are hoping to return if the board would like in late August or early September with a subsequent update based on any new information we get from ODFNW or any comments we hear from property owners. So with that, I welcome any questions.
So with those the map changes you mentioned, you kind of list out the specific areas that it's around. Is that more detail or movement of sage grouse? Just more detailed information?
I would say it's a mixture of the two, so it's
Okay.
certainly more detailed information, but as part of that, they did identify a variety of leks that were abandoned. So it did appear that some sage grouse have moved over time.
Oh, okay.
One thing I would offer from the bleachers, I didn't want to come up, is I wanted to recognize, again, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. Nicole has been, and previous staff have been interfacing with ODFNW and BLM. As the county commissioners did recommend and sign the requisite intergovernmental agreements to be a cooperating agency. So this, in some respects, is a manifestation of that coordination. So that intergovernmental agreement, I think, was signed, I want to say 12, 18 months ago. And Commissioner Dare, you were one of the commissioners that I recall that brought this to our attention. So it is very much a formality. We have the code in place. The maps will ultimately, once it's recognized by ODFNW and acknowledged by the Land Conservation Development Commission, we will be obligated to amend our comprehensive plan and our maps just to keep it in alignment. And a big part of that is the board has prioritized state obligations to be codified in our local code for customer service. So they can read in our county zoning the requisite requirements to the extent that anybody finds that they're doing a large scale development out of this area. They can rely on our zoning as opposed to us saying, well, you need to check out OAR 660 Division 14 or 15 to understand the rules. We haven't codified it. So that's just been a tradition that we've undertaken over the years, is to ensure state law is integrated into our local zoning structure.
So what about the Roth Ranch? Where does it fit in here? I mean, it's one of the two sites left. Excluding the BLM land, so.
That is a great question. We did reach out to Tim Brownell. I did send him some information. I believe the Roth Ranch didn't see a change. I can look back in some of my emails and take a look. But we are in coordination with him of identifying those specific properties in the landfill siting process and making him aware of any proposed changes.
Okay,
So
so you don't think that land site changed at all then?
let me take a look really quick in my email.
Again, to my knowledge, as Nicole's doing that, just to fill in some space here, to date, we have not, Deschutes County has not applied the sage grouse conservation rules to we haven't seen a large scale proposal that requires the mitigation rules. Commissioner Devone will remember we did an audit back in the early 2010s. We were one of the few jurisdictions that had sage grouse sensitive bird and mammal combining zone, and we just, as you're well aware, as you drive along this section of Highway 20, what we see are ranches and exclusive farm uses. You don't see a large scale development. So I think that's another example of just the commitment that the county's made to sage grouse since the early 90s.
Yeah, just looking through my email, so that the Roth property specifically was previously in the low density habitat area and there's no change. It'll remain in that.
In the low density. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you, Nicole. Nice to see you today.
Nice to see you.
So the survey from Southern Deschutes County, I know my wife did CC'd an email on that. She was all excited about the response, and then she found out that some of those were robot hacked the responses, so now they're trying to figure out the numbers.
Oh,
So
dudes.
she was so excited that it was 3,000 or something.
The challenges of technology.
Yeah, so-
Yeah.
It was a downer.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And this time, item number 5, this month's treasury report. Next. Yep.
Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, I'm Bill Coon, Deschutes County Treasurer. And as usual, I'll provide a very high-level overview of economic conditions for your benefit. I will be happy to say in June, it was a fairly quiet month from an economic shock standpoint. We didn't have anything like the debt ceiling debate or the banking crisis or anything like that. So it was fairly even keel. I will say that the Fed is actually looking at increasing supervisory regulatory oversight in the banking industry that is becoming very apparent. And it will likely have a somewhat significant impact on lending. That's kind of concerns about liquidity, capital, and certainly credit quality, I think, are starting to come to the surface right now. A lot of articles, discussion out there with regards to commercial real estate refinancings and what's happening in that arena, concerns about occupancy rates and whether or not these properties are going to be eligible for refi, typically a rate adjustment, and whether or not the owners will be able to kind of recapitalize or inject capital into the project if needed because of appraisal requirements. I think that's a budding concern right now. Certainly my contacts in the banking industry and elsewhere telling me that that's a very real concern. And how that's going to impact financial performance of these projects, not necessarily in Deschutes County, but throughout the state, throughout the region, throughout the state and beyond. So I think that's one issue that is coming to the forefront. Probably know a lot more over the next few months as to whether or not that becomes a real concern.
So Bill, how much have they walked from the San Francisco hotels? My husband was just telling me.
You
the other
know, I
day.
have a former client that I was in contact with a couple of weeks ago that owns a property in downtown San Francisco that they bought in 2018. A significant investment, a couple blocks off of Union Square. And with what's happening in San Francisco right now and how much of that is completely out of control of the investors, there's concern about whether or not they can keep that property performing. So it's a real issue. And so how that plays out at the local level, what impact that has on revenues overall remains to be seen. But it's another issue that we need to keep our eyes on out there. I think what we're seeing right now, there's conflicting data on whether or not we're potentially moving towards a recession, or if we're going to be able to manage what the Fed calls a soft landing. I think what happens over the next probably 60 to 90 days is going to be very telling in terms of whether or not they can pull off a soft landing without a significant shock to the economy. Right now, there's some forecasters out there that are predicting late 2003, early 2004, that we might be heading into a recession. But again, there's others that say we might be able to avoid it. I think with what we're seeing right now with the CPI, the June CPI was down to 3.1%, not down to the target 2% that the Fed has established. And so in all likelihood, when the Fed meets on Wednesday, there's what I saw on the internet this morning, a 96% chance that the Fed's going to bump the Fed funds rate by 25 basis points. But again, this kind of ties into the pause and adjust philosophy that they've had. They took a pause in June. In all likelihood, we'll be looking at another Fed funds increase here in a couple days. And then there's I guess the general consensus is that there may be a period of several months where they take no further action to allow the significant increase that they've already injected into the economy to take full effect. So
Can
right
you-
now go ahead.
Help, so we're talking, when you said recession, I was just kind of processing it, possibly the end of the year. What's a recession, kind of the textbook definition, so GDP
Two
not growing or
consecutive
going
quarters of negative growth.
negative
it's the
growth, so
technical,
going
yeah.
backwards.
Yeah, and right
Two
now the
quarters.
forecast is,
But when you say recession, that doesn't. A recession could be a couple months or a long time.
and they're really, right now, there's considerable
I mean,
debate
that's
about
what-
whether or not we're even gonna go into a recession. And the duration, I think, they haven't even really speculated on
So, but the definition could be 2 months, 2 quarters.
2
6
quarters of
months.
negative growth.
Didn't we already have that?
We have not, we've we've had nominal growth over the last 2 quarters of
Well, no, I'm talking about like about a year.
1.2%, something like that. It's been virtually flat, but not negative. And I think that,
Quarters, yeah.
like I said, I think over the next probably 60 days, 60 to maybe 90 days, we're gonna know if that's the direction we're heading or not. I think there's a couple of things that we have to look at. Kind of jumping around here a little bit, elevated prices, obviously the inflation that we've undergone to this point. Tighter monetary supply was what they've done with increasing rates. The access to credit in general is huge, both commercial and consumer. And that also can force us into a recessionary situation. And then just reduce governmental spending, which is also happening across the board. So we're not seeing the stimulus. We're not seeing the further programs designed to stimulate economic activity that we saw during the COVID years. And so a lot of those programs have kind of run their course. So we're not seeing that artificially high economic activity that wouldn't normally be there.
Bill, according to NPR, we did have negative growth in the first quarter and second quarter of 22. So going back there,
Yeah, I just looked at some economic data. I think that might be conflicting with some data that I looked at. Yeah,
But it
we're,
must have been close to 0 then, or.
yeah,
whatever
it's been
some number
really
is.
close to 0. And
it was 0.9.
I think one of those quarters was actually adjusted positive. But I'm not, there's considerable data out there and I think a lot of times depending on where you go for your data source.
Here's from US News and Money. And
Yeah.
they're saying that it was still negative. So anyway, that was in August.
Yeah,
They're
and
always-
again, some of the things that we're looking at right now, the labor market is still extremely strong. The last unemployment data was 3.6%. And they're projecting with some of the things that are going on in the economy that unemployment rate could go up to 4.6% here shortly. But again, the Fed is looking at the economy right now, it's basically full employment. And so they're not concerned about slowing down the economy as much as they are getting a handle on inflation. Yeah, again, the June CPI numbers came in at 3.1%. The June PPI numbers, which is on the producer price side of things, so on the manufacturing side, decreased to 0.5% in the month of June. I think what I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes on is housing. And I think that's a significant issue right now. The May housing starts declined 8% over the prior month. And sales of existing homes decreased 3.3% over the prior month. And compared to June of 2022, existing home sales were down a whopping 19% year over year. Which a lot of that we've talked about before, where homeowners are locked into a really low mortgage and they feel handcuffed. They're not making the moves that they typically would upgrading to a larger home or one in a different location. So that's impacting supply, and it's certainly having an impact at the regional level. The June Beacon report showed that Bend area median home price rose to $785,000, which is actually $46,000 higher than the previous month. And that actually now exceeded the peak that we hit in March of last year. So what we're seeing here at the local level, 24% of the sales in the month of June were over $1 million. And when compared to July of 2019 or June of 2019, only 5% of those sales were over $1 million. So what we're seeing is the mix has changed phenomenally compared to what we've seen in prior years. And again, it kind of goes back to housing affordability.
Do you have the Redmond numbers with you too?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Because I
Redmond-
think they're a bit different.
Yeah, they are. Redmond statistics showed a median sales price of $473,000, which was virtually flat over the prior month, but it's still down from the peak of last year in Redmond. So Redmond is our affordable housing community, bedroom community to Bend and elsewhere, and but those numbers are narrowing. Just because of people now are being forced to go to Redmond for housing affordability, and then they're also forced to drive to Bend if they're commuting. So it was also interesting in last month's reporting, they provided a little further granularity with regards to locational pricing in Bend in particular. And the Bend Northwest quadrant is commanding a significant 50% premium over comparable single family homes in the 15 to 2,000 square foot category when compared to Northeast Bend and Southeast Bend. 50% premium for basically the same sized home in a different location within Bend. Interesting, my wife and I were out on the tour homes yesterday, and we were talking to an ADU designer builder, and we got on obviously the subject of Deschutes County and what we're considering at the county level for ADUs, and he has had a significant number of inquiries from people that are kind of planning ahead in anticipation of a potential code change that would allow ADU development. So again, that I think that would free up land availability and certainly be able to meet some of the needs of affordable and workforce housing. So yeah. Anyway, from an economic standpoint, that's pretty much what I'm seeing out there right now. Any questions?
You don't have the Lapine numbers, do you?
I don't know if I have those. I didn't bring the full report. I will say that I did know Lapine, we're not
It's like
seeing the
3,000
price
something.
appreciation in Lapine. And we're also seeing an extended days on market is what I recall from that report. So I think there's different markets within Deschutes County are reacting differently to the demand for housing. But again, South County has not seen quite the price appreciation, or there's more homes on the market right now. So there's an extended days on market now. I don't know if this makes you feel any better or not, but Bend a lot of times is compared to Bozeman, Montana, and the median single family residential sales price in Bozeman, Montana is nearing $900,000. The median.
Well, they had Yellowstone.
Yeah, there you go.
We need to have whatever.
Yeah, well, I don't think we need something like that.
I mean, Nick Bell only been once, whatever. Bozeman, I think. And he was working the British Open this weekend, so he had to leave his fishing for the week.
Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe somebody will do a movie, show about us.
Any other comments on the economy? Okay. For the June treasurer's report, our portfolio balance at month end was $274 million, which was an increase of $15.6 million from the previous month, and a decrease of 8 million year over year. And, you can look to a number of corollaries with regards to the year over year comparison.
But I think that's the first time I've even seen
Yeah.
that, a decrease
Yeah.
year over year.
And we're, and Robert and his team can certainly comment more on the specifics of why that's occurring, but, part of it is our expenses are rising. And certainly, ARPA funds are being distributed, and I think one thing that I noticed, we're heading into an increased level of construction spending on some of our projects within Deschutes County, so I think we're starting to see that. Yeah, the bills are coming through on pay applications on those projects. Also, I wanted to comment too on the change in portfolio mix that we saw in June. Obviously, the decision that we made in mid-June to liquidate roughly 10.5 million in our investment portfolio, which those funds were then reinvested in the LGIP pool. So we got an immediate positive impact, a higher yield with the LGIP fund, but it also started to improve short-term liquidity and also increasing our overall portfolio yield. We should start to see full benefits of that in July and beyond. Net investment earnings were 170,000 for the month. I don't want that number cause undue concern because that was impacted by a realized book loss of 344,000 that we incurred through the sale of that investment portfolio. So excluding that book loss, our earnings would have been 533,000 for the period. So very comparable to prior months. But again, we did see the impact of that book loss against revenues that were generated off the portfolio. All portfolio category balances are well within policy guidelines. As reported last month, the LGIP rate has remained flat at 4.05% and hasn't changed for several months. However, we did receive notification from the Oregon State Treasury's office today that the LGIP rate will increase to 4.3% tomorrow. So that rate's going up. And I've felt that for several months now that we've had upward pressure on the LGIP rate, and we're actually going to see the benefit of that starting tomorrow. The average portfolio yield was 2.3%, which again is higher than the prior month. And we believe that that's also already being influenced by some of the investment sale reinvestment activity in the LGIP pool. The portfolio weighted average time to maturity is down to 1.13 years, which is lower than the 1.16 years that we saw in the prior month. And this again is a function of the greater balances being kept short term at both our bank and LGIP. The short portfolio duration gives the county some flexibility over the next several months in this period of rate volatility. And again, we have a great option with the LGIP pool. And we also decided to take $5 million out of the LGIP pool fund a couple months ago, and we invested in 30-day treasury bills, which boosted our yield on that $5 million by 120 basis points. So again, looking for opportunities short term to create a little bit more income off of this portfolio, but also recognizing that we're not typically in the mode of reinvesting or selling investments prior to maturity. So our general philosophy is to hold the maturity, but we're taking advantage of some of the higher rates we're seeing out there right now selectively to create better opportunities for the county. So I would say right now that essentially over the next 90 days or so, that we until we start to see a significant influx of tax receipts starting in late October, that we're not going to be investing long-term or longer term to capture the longer edge of the yield curve right now. But there's some very attractive rates short-term right now because of the inverted yield curve that we're currently experiencing. And the difference between the 2-year treasury and the 10-year treasury was now 105 basis points, where short-term treasury bills are paying, or notes are paying that much higher than the longer end of the yield curve. So just, and that is typically a key indicator of future recession. But like I said, we just don't have enough economic data right now to know if that's going to in fact take place. Any other questions or comments?
Is there something maturing pretty much every month or a couple times a month?
Yeah, we have, redemptions are $6 to $7 to maybe $8 million a month right now over the next several months. Matter of fact, we had I think it was a $2 million note that matured today. And that's certainly part of our laddering of our maturities as we get into our longer term investment cycle. So we'll take a stronger look at making sure that we have adequate redemptions throughout the year to basically cover our cash flow needs. So, great. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
I'm gonna go back and research that though, Commissioner, to see what. Yeah, negative growth.
Yeah, it was like over a year ago, so.
Okay.
Anyway, interesting. Well, I noticed that the red line from the treasury is up at the very top now on this graph. Very, like, when has that ever happened, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't.
It's happened quickly.
Hey, finance report, thank you very much, Robert.
Yes, good afternoon, Director Robert Tintel, Chief Financial Officer. So today you should have in front of you the preliminary June report for 2023. And I want to make sure you know it's preliminary because we are giving this update as of what's posted in units for invoices as of June. This was probably started here a couple of weeks ago, even because it takes time for staff and departments to get information in. Just a reminder, we're at the end of the year, and so we'll continue to get invoices for June, into July and August even. So we'll still be posting back if we get some revenues in that are for that year or expenditures, we'll be posting those back in the system. So that's why if you also look at when we get into the report, if you look at the actuals column and then you look at the year-end projections, in some cases they could be different. For example, expenses will be higher because we know there are going to be additional expenses that we're going to continue to post back for June. Because if the goods or services, if the goods were received or the services performed, we have to book those back into June. So just wanted to say that up front. The next time you'll see the final numbers is when we present the ACFR, Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, and that's when all numbers are final by then. But this is preliminary data that we had and still projections for June. Overall, not a lot has changed from the last month when we talked about May and we were projecting actuals. So there will be just a few funds that I'll highlight. A lot
The
of
room
it.
tax revenue got better by 900,000.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah. So that's luckily June was a good month in there. Okay, so first page 116 in your package, just high level overview on the memo. The revenue is 42.4 million or 96.9% of budget. And last year it was at 40.3. This is $2.1 million more than we had projected. So that's a good sign. And then expenditures 4.3 million at 95% of budget. Last year was 41.5 and this was 1.9 over last year. The dashboard gives you just a high level overview, but we'll have the general fund and we'll talk more about the general fund as we go through this as well. So page 117 on your packet talked about FTE and unfilled positions or the position control summary. Actually, surprisingly, it was another month where we had no change in the FTE. I don't know what previous years have been like, but for the last 2 months, it always seems like when I first started, we always had change in FTEs, but no change for the last couple of months here. In the total FTE, we did end up the year at a 10.43 overall percent of the unfilled positions. So there are still some funds and departments that need positions filled. You'll notice the sheriff's office, a few down from after the big block in the beginning, 12% unfilled. And you can see they average in their 30s for their positions. Health services ended at 10% unfilled, and they're usually in the upper 40s to the mid 40s. At times they got below 40, but they're up there again. And then adult parole and probation at almost 15% unfilled. They're usually around 7 positions unfilled. And of course, as we know, 911, they seem to hang on to about 8 positions that they're always in need of on average, but about 14% unfilled for them. All right, so page 118, just high level, if we look at all the funds countywide, all blended together, what does it look like here? If you look at the last column, under projection, the gray shaded column, total resources, we're expecting to bring in 352 million, which this number, it's actually just a little bit higher than you'll see the actuals column, because we are expecting more things to be posted. Last month, when we presented this, it's $1.3 million higher, all funds combined. So that's headed in the right direction on revenues. The next page, 119, when we talk about requirements, or these are the expenditures, we are anticipating to end at 402 million, so a lot more to be posted here. And this is 2.8 million less than departments had projected last year. So now as we get closer to year end, and now June is final, but again, we are just waiting for the invoices that continue to come in now that still relate to June, but we have a much better estimate of where we think we'll end up here. And that brings us to 121, page 121, which is the ending fund balances, which is one thing we look at for all funds combined. Countywide, we'll end up total fund balance. We're estimating at $184 million in the projection, which is 4.2 million higher than we were projecting last month. Again, we'll continue to post items in this area, both revenues, expenditures, as we go through the accounting process. A little more detail on the general fund, page 122 in your packet. As we know, if we look at revenues, the largest, I'd say, gap in revenues for the general fund for this fiscal year was in the clerk's office. We talked about that with the decrease in transactions, but again, that's about $1 million. So that they really do a great job there. And as Steve has mentioned, usually they're a contributor to the general fund, but in this year, with the decrease in revenues, that's not the case in this year. We are projecting our revenues to be about 190,000 higher than we were last month. So that was a good change there. And our expenditures, we're expecting a decrease of 105,000 in the year in projections from what we had last year. So overall, our ending fund balance for the general fund will be at about 13.6 million. And that's about 102,000 higher than what we projected last month. So, I mean, not a big difference, 102,000 over 13.6. So it's close there. Speaking of TRT on page 124, fund 160, 170. Yes, now we have gotten the June numbers. Again, June is really from May activity here, but what we posted, and our room tax revenue did end up being down from what we budgeted, the top line on resources by $928,000. So a little better than we thought we were going to end up at the end of the month. June ended up being a better month. Just to reflect a little bit, April was down 31%, almost 32. May was down 27%. So we were curious how June might come in. Luckily, June was only down 2.6%. So that helped bring us to our $12.6 million in TRT revenue. Now that's still under about $1 million from what we had budgeted, but it is close to the fiscal year 22 budget and a little under fiscal year 22 actuals. And you may remember throwing lots of fiscal years out here, but in fiscal year 24, we budgeted 12.6. So we're ending up this year about what we budgeted for next year.
Good idea.
Yeah. And days like this with smoke, who knows how anything impacts. Multiple things can impact transient room tax revenue or lodging vacancy rates. Just a reminder also on this page. So you'll see our ending fund balance, 4.3 million. That is, we still have our $5 million commitment, 4 million to Sun River, 1 million to Mount Bachelor. Just so you know, we did pay the second payment, but the first one of 2 million. We paid Sun River their $2 million payment in July. So when we get to July actuals, that's where you'll see that fund balance did come down by that first payment already. And we're just working on contracting with Mount Bachelor. So we're expecting that beginning to go out sometime soon. So we're ending at about 5.4 million in ending fund balance. We budgeted 4.7 as beginning. So we're starting about 300,000 less than we thought we would be in fiscal year 24 for that. Fine. Questions on TRT? Okay, I'm gonna go to page 127, Sheriff's Office Fund 255. Feel free to ask questions on any fund. If there hasn't been major changes in that fund, I'm just skipping over it, but all the information's in your packet if you'd like to look at that detail. Sheriff's Office Fund, their revenues that they're projecting for their final year end is matching their actuals at this point, except for $2, but it's 797,000 more than they expected last month. So that's good to refine that. And their expenditures ending the year at 58.8, which is about 600,000 less than they had projected last month. So they'll believe they'll end at $10.1 million in their fund balance at the end of the year, which is less than they budgeted. But again, as expenditures come in, that's how they'll tune up those numbers. Okay, page 128 in your packet, Health Services Fund 274. Here, their projections for the revenues will be at 55.5 million, which is about even, well, it's $432,000 less than they thought they'd have last month, but out of 55 million, not that much of a difference. Their expenditures are expecting to end up at 63.4, which is 1.3 million less than they projected last month. So that helps them at the end of their fund balance get to a 12.1 million, which is 900 more than they thought last month. Community Development Fund 295, always like to highlight this one. All of them are good to highlight, but you know, there's been a lot of conversation regarding community development. This is page 132 in your packet. Not a lot has really changed from last month. This is just another good example to highlight. Their revenues, their resources are under budget by $2.2 million. Not that that's a good thing, but you will see their expenditures, their total requirement are under budget by $1.7 million. The point to highlight is it's a great example of when you have decreased revenues, then the department took proactive action to decrease their expenditures as well. So they're really trying to manage their fund well. Other departments do that too, but this is just a clear example of where you can reduce, and they did. Not that it's a good thing, but they were able to fiscally have fiscal responsibility for their fund. Oh, and they're in the room. Yes.
Yes, thank you. No, thank you, Peter.
I was gonna say that comment anyway.
Yes.
I was wondering if you said it because Peter was like.
That's right.
No, really, Peter, thank you for
Absolutely.
being so aware of what your department is doing and the work Sherry does and everything.
It's really just sharing.
It's just Sherry out there. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not always by choice, but sometimes you have to manage not by choice, but by reality. So. All right. So I'm going to go a few pages ahead, 137 in your packet, Solid Waste Fund 610.
That one kind of came up. I mean,
Yeah.
it had been kind of hanging a couple of percentage points below.
Yeah, so solid waste, well, their revenues from their last month's projection did go down about 200,000. They're expecting to end their revenues, their resources at 13.9 million, slightly under what their budget was. And then their expenditures and total requirements, it's about 50,000 less or 50,000 more than they did last month. And they'll end up the year at 2.5 million for their total fund balance, which is actually it's 258,000 less than last month, but still healthy, strong department there. And they have as you know, a lot of building out, a lot of expenditures. Their forecast there's lots of things in there. Finally, or closer to the end, Risk Management Fund 670. Eric walked back in the room, so.
Oh, you know what, I have a crazy question about the fair.
Yes.
Trying to get this figured out in my head, the budget to actual report 616. So where do the fair sponsorships go to? Would the fair for this year, which is it really 24's fair or is it 23's fair? But the fair sponsorship shows this negative number of 6345. And on page 140 for us. And so I actually we received an email today of fair sponsors. So I sent Dan an email back and I said, okay, Dan, where are we at for cash sponsorships for the fair? And he answered me with, well, we're roughly at 130,000 and 20,000 in kind. So I'm wondering, so some of those numbers, shouldn't they be showing up somewhere in the 23 fair? Or is this the 23 fair we're talking about? It's gonna be in another week?
Well, that's the 24 fair,
Okay,
which will be, well, it's the fiscal year 24 fair.
right,
And these are numbers for fiscal year 23. So if you look at page 139, the fund 616, you will see there's a line for fair sponsorship. And their actuals, what's hit Eunice so far is 99,000. What they're projecting for fiscal year 23 revenue was 109,000.
okay, because he told me that it should be like 130,000 plus 20,000 in kind. Would the in kind show up there too?
In kind typically does. I mean, we should report that as revenue, but again, if he's referring to fiscal year 24 sponsorship, that should show up in fiscal year 24.
Okay,
But in kind of wouldn't show up in the budget.
We also do provide a calendar.
right, I know, that's what I was looking, isn't this the calendar one?
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought this
Which
was
will
the
be different
calendar
than
one.
Fiscal year. Budget.
But this is still from June. This is last fiscal year.
Right.
calendar
I know,
of Last year's.
We can follow up.
okay, I would just kind of like
Or if
to,
you want to forward me that email from Jeff.
oh,
or
sure,
whomever.
okay, it's actually from Dan,
Oh, from Dan.
okay, I'll send it to you.
Okay. Risk management, page 144, fund 670. The revenues are about the same as last month. Their requirements, where their projection to end at year end is $3 million, slightly more than their actuals at this point of 2.9. So it is $1 million less as of this point for fiscal year 23 of what payments they would have made that this year. In fiscal year 23 just ended. And their fund balance ending at 9.3 million, which is higher than their budget of 5.1. So, and it's about $1 million more than last month of where they're at because of that less payment in their expenditures in fiscal year 23.
So what's your reasoning for having $1 million more? Anything special? We got lucky?
Until fiscal year 24.
Yeah,
Yeah, risk expenditures are pretty hard to predict.
I know,
So I tend to be pretty conservative until the end of the year, then it's like, okay, we're not gonna. And then also, what isn't shown is outstanding liability that we could pay out next month or in the next couple of years. So every year I have an actuarial study done and they give us a target number to have in risk reserves. As part of being self-insured.
okay, well, at least
The other thing
9.3 million looks
is
good.
I tend to over budget expenditures on both workers' comp and general liability, so that I don't have to do a budget adjustment. Luckily, workers' comp expenditures and general liability expenditures kind of go like this, where workers' comp will be anywhere from a low of 400,000 to a high of 1.1 million. And general liability will be anywhere from, if you look back 10 years, a low of 200,000 to a high of 1.5 million based on, payouts and jury awards and legal fees or legal expenses.
Okay, page 145 in your packet, health benefits fund 675. We've talked a lot about this, and this is a good one to be mindful of as well. Revenues are about where we thought they'd be last month when we reported on this at 24.7 million. The requirements here, its projection will end up at 31.3 million about. You'll see actuals today is still only 28.6. But we are projecting out because we accrue back those expenditures that have incurred. We just haven't been billed yet. So we expect that to be at about 31.2. So we'll end the year at this point, the latest projection 4.7, which is about, 4.8 million. For fiscal year 24, we did budget a beginning working capital balance of 5.7. We talked about that. So we will be starting the year with $1 million less than what we thought we would for that fund, which is substantial. And this is that fund that we're monitoring, looking at rates, charging departments differently for that fund. So we'll be definitely keeping an eye on that as well.
And our beginning fund balance is down from 11.3 million the year before.
Yes. Yeah, it was 11.3 this year. It'll be 5.7, which really is 4.7. Yep. Okay, any other questions on any of the? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, this room tax revenue went the right way. That did help, I
Yeah.
believe.
Okay, so what else do we have here?
Yeah, I know.
Other items on marijuana hearings officer decision.
Good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Anthony Regini, principal planner. So I'm here today because we have a recent hearings officer decision that was issued actually last Thursday. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the decision itself, some potential implications of the decision, which then lead into staff's concerns about it. And then I'll end with your options, essentially. So I'm going to back up a little bit. So this is, as Eric talked about, this is an initiation of use related to a marijuana production facility. So as you're probably aware, when we issue a land use decision, regardless of which level staff hearings officer board, there's a duration of approval. So in most cases, property owners are able to initiate, and in most cases, complete the development in that duration of approval. In some cases, they're not able to for a variety of reasons. And so what our code provides is what's called initiation of use. It allows a property owner to come in, submit an application, and essentially prove that they've initiated the use. And so there's a three-part test to initiation of use. The first one is that the holder of the land use approval has altered the land or the structures on site. That those alterations were made towards completion of the development, whatever they were approved for, and that it represented a good faith effort to complete the development. So this is what, in this case, the applicant, the property owner applied for was an application to prove that they'd initiated the use, in this case, again, marijuana production facility. In our staff report, this case is somewhat unusual in that we don't really ever see this kind of scenario where approximately 80% of the expenditures made for the facility were made before they ever got land use approval. And historically, planning has viewed that as not good faith. That when you think about land use, it provides a forum for the public to be involved in that decision-making process, to participate. And so for that reason, historically, planning has not viewed those types of expenditures before land use approval as counting towards the development. In this case, the hearings officer disagreed and found that the expenditures made prior to the land use approval should be counted, and it did represent a good faith effort. And so that's sort of very broadly what the hearings officer decision says. The hearings officer approved the marijuana production facility as initiated. And again, staff disagrees with that decision. And so I want to talk a little bit about, first, are there any questions about the hearings officer decision? I know this is coming to you as a surprise, so we didn't get a chance to put it on the agenda.
There was an email on Thursday.
Yeah.
So I read up on.
Okay, I wasn't sure to what
about
extent the
opinion.
board had
Yeah.
an opportunity to engage with it. So if you have any questions about the decision itself before I talk about implications? Nope. Okay.
I mean,
Yes.
what can you unpack the hearings officer's logic there?
Yeah.
The reasoning?
Absolutely. So what the applicant testified to was that they began about a year and a half prior discussions with the county, beginning with a pre-application meeting. And so the hearings officer found that because the applicant had initiated those conversations with staff, that all these expenditures were clearly towards the development and represented good faith, that they were always intending to complete the development And because it was clear to the applicant that they were likely to be approved, that it was okay. And again, staff is concerned with that particular logic. Commissioner Chang, did you have other questions about this, the decision?
So this applicant started these discussions, kind of started working through the process with the county a year and a half before
Approximately.
the
Approval.
before the approval. At what point did they submit the application?
It was about 4 months prior to the approval. So there was again, they started the conversation with the county about a year and a half in advance. Then about 4 months before the approval was issued, and Avery Johnson, the staff planner, can correct me. I believe it was early part of spring of 2018 when it was actually approved. And so December or thereabouts was when the application was submitted. So there's about a 4-month window in there after they submitted the application. But again, the issue staff has is that the bulk of the expenditures were made before they ever received approval.
And I mean, this pretty long period, 1.5 years, right, you know, of engagement before approval. Like I don't, this is pretty far back history. I mean, I don't have the, you know, I was here, so I don't have the firsthand historical knowledge to correlate that with when you know, essentially land use around marijuana production facilities was very contentious. I mean, is that one of the reasons why it took so long for them to submit their application?
Every application is different. Like I've worked on pre-application meetings where I didn't see the application for 2 or 3 years afterwards. There are so many factors that go into when the property owner decides to apply. Some will get a pre-application meeting and within a couple months we'll have an application because they're ready. Others, as you can imagine, some of our pre-application meetings are more in the line of tire kicking. They're just trying to understand the process, understand the rules. And so now they still have to engage with their design professional, maybe legal counsel, and it's so maybe years before we see an actual application. I don't know what the case is for this particular property owner, but a year and a half is frankly not that unusual. It just really depends on the circumstances for the property owner. Any other questions about the hearings officer decision?
So back to the basics here. So this is an application that was approved by a hearings officer. Is it appealed or what's bringing you here
No,
today?
and so,
Yeah,
when I get to the options for the board, we'll talk about why I'm here. So again, the hearings officer issued a decision, and I want to talk a little bit about the implications. So again, when you think about land use, part of its importance is that it allows the public to participate in that process, right? And so when you look at this decision, it potentially could give property owners the idea that they can and should potentially begin their development before they ever get land use. So there's a concern from staff, and you know, we've consulted with legal counsel as well, that we don't want people to get this idea. The second issue we have is you can imagine people who would begin their project before they get land use. This could lead to code enforcement, which is often what we see in code enforcement. People begin before they ever get approval. And so again, staff has a couple of significant, what we believe are significant concerns. And again, historically, we had only considered those expenses and expenditures made since the land use approval, from the time of the land use approval to when it expired, because that's to us was good faith. So those are the potential implications, not that it could come to fruition that way, but we are certainly concerned. So then we get to the options for the board. This particular decision, unfortunately, is very late in the clock. The hearings officer had a personal issue to take care of, and so the decision was very late. Today, I think I misreported in the email, but today is day 108. And so if the board wanted to, part of our procedure ordinance allows the board to call up a hearings officer decision or a staff decision without an appeal. You can call it up because you feel it's important to address it. And so although this one is late in the clock, again, we're in day 108. If the board wanted to call it up, we have a 10-day notice. It would be about day 130 or so, probably, before we could get to a hearing, very, very late. And because the applicant has approval, they're unlikely, my guess is they would be unlikely to extend the clock. But part of my reason for being here is there is a second initiation of use by the same property owner on an adjoining property where today is day 92. So I'm gonna be, Avery sent an email to the hearings officer, asked for status. I'm gonna call her this afternoon. I suspect her reasons for this approval will be the same in the second. And so, again, part of my reason to come before you today is to think about whether or not you want staff to come back to you should that decision come in similar to this one. And then during the appeal period, we ask the board, do you want to call it up? And we issue an order, if there's a board order, and then we issue a notice of public hearing. So you don't have to make the decision today, but it's really more for this decision, do you want to call this one up? And again, we're very late in the clock. And then for the second one, would you like staff to come back so that you can decide whether or not to call it up? And at that point, it's a discussion. No decision has to be made at this point.
So the hearings officer has not made a decision on the property that's day 92?
Yeah, the second decision.
Okay, we're waiting for that, but that should be any second now?
We're hoping.
Okay.
We're hoping it'll come soon, because again, the facts in this case are very similar to the facts in the second case, so it should be a really easy decision to issue. And so my plan is to.
But you're not happy with the first decision
I am
that
not.
they
What's the
issued?
precedent, so.
Yes,
It sets the potential
Yeah.
for someone to, again, get the idea that they can begin development for land use, which we think is not in keeping with what you do for land use.
Well, but it's a full risk by the applicant. If there's a denial, they've made investments that are at risk. And that scenario isn't changing at all.
Right. Well, that's it. I mean, that's sort of a third reason why I don't like the rationale that was used is that, again, you're right, property owners could begin spending money and investing only to find out that they can't be approved or won't be approved. We just think it sets a bad potential precedent in initiation of use applications. And so again, my questions for the board are, do you want to call this one up, recognizing that, again, we don't have a lot of time. It would be very, very difficult to get through a hearing and the decision in 150 days. And then your idea is whether or not you want staff to come back for the second decision, because that will have much more time for the board to deal with. And again, at that point, we're going to come before you for you to discuss whether or not you want to call it. You don't have to make the decision right now.
So what's the scope of, if we call it up, the intention is to review the application decision as a whole, or just on that part of that logic?
It can be all of it. And really what staff would do at that point is to, again, we'll do this in writing, relay to you what we think the appropriate review should be and what our rationale is for the existing decision and how it affects potentially future property owners and their development. And the board could certainly decide to agree with the hearings officer. Again, no decisions are being made today. And because this is local code, you get to an opportunity, unlike with statutory code, to interpret your own code and let us know how you want initiation of use to be reviewed in the future.
Yeah, any thoughts?
okay, so there's 42 days on the first one, the one that's 108 days. And the other one's 58, but if they're doing the wrong thing on the one with 108 days, how can we overlook it to go to the next one, where we have more time? I mean, does that send a mixed message out there?
Well, again,
Consistency?
sure,
We need that?
and I recognize that we're just in a really tough place with the clock. So again, the board can call this decision up. And staff will do everything we can to get through the hearing, through the decision writing, draft decision, all of that. It's just gonna be difficult to get it done before 150. And again, I doubt the applicant. This is my
Well, not
guess.
extended,
Yeah, they
yes.
have an approval. I don't know why
I
they.
can't imagine.
I can't imagine they would extend the clock to allow us to get through that process. So again, if the board wanted to, we certainly can, and we will make every effort to get in front of you as fast as possible. Hold the hearing. You could decide not to have an open record period, for example. There are ways to make this more efficient, but it's going to be rough to get there before the 150th day, no matter what we do for that one, for this current decision.
But the second one, we haven't got an opinion yet, and there's only 16 days apart between the two.
That may be enough. And I'm going to say this, like, if, for example, should if the board were to agree with staff's position, I've already begun to frankly write the decision in my head, so it's.
Oh.
Yeah, and so the 16 days is enough, is what I'm saying, Eric. I appreciate the concern, but I think 16 days enough. I think, Stephanie has been keeping track of this, so I think I'm gonna speak for Stephanie. I think between Stephanie and I, we can get this decision drafted pretty quickly in front of the board. And I think the 16 days is enough, even with the 10-day notice, but it would require that the hearings officer get us that decision within the next couple of days. So hence my phone call this afternoon. If we don't get it for whatever reason, then we're gonna be in the same spot as the other one.
Talk about how this precedent plays out.
Well,
I mean,
I'm gonna use this.
who's gonna, like,
Yeah.
who knows
Well-
that this happened and, kind of how do other people get the idea?
Yes.
Like, oh,
Great
I've
question.
got an application for, something completely
Sure.
different.
Yeah.
Like, do they, I mean, how does the idea get in there? Like, oh, it's okay to do this.
Yeah, and I'm gonna answer that question second. I'm first talking about precedent. So we've been throwing on the word precedent. To be clear, hearings officer decisions do not create precedent for the county. Only board decisions, LUBA decisions, higher court decisions create precedent. Hearings officer decisions do not create precedent. So, and I say this because even with this decision going out, and even if the second one goes out, we've already discussed internally how we would handle an application where someone used this rationale. We would essentially send it to a hearing again. And then really give the board a chance to call it up, assuming you even agreed with staff. So first, hearings officer decisions do not create precedent for the board or the county, okay? The second part of your question is, you'd be surprised at how developers find these decisions. They're all public information. And so we certainly have land use attorneys who use these things all the time. So it would not surprise me that someone would use this. It's not general knowledge, but for those folks who are in the land use field, it's very common for them to scour hearings officer decisions, board decisions, LUBA decisions, frankly, and use it. But again, we already had internal discussions about how we would handle that, should the board not want to call that up.
I'm recalling, one of the first, issues that I heard about, coming from a land use hearing officer was, Three Sisters Irrigation District. They're in Conduit Hydro,
Yeah.
where they had done some work prior to their approval. I mean, this is pretty analogous, or is that a different?
It's essentially the same scenario where, again, they had initiated discussions with the county and then started work. And you correctly recall that was brought up, that, the neighbors were upset. And Commissioner Devon, you may remember, we saw this with the Ski Lake project, where all the excavation was done before land use, and so the neighbors were very upset. So again, from staff's perspective, we're trying to avoid those kinds of scenarios. This would be very difficult to deal with at the decision-making end of it when work has already been done.
So we're not talking about a legal precedent, but we're trying to avoid an impression that that's okay.
Exactly.
Can you, so those two examples that we just talked about, can you recall for me what consequences there were
Yeah.
for those entities?
So understand that when we go into code enforcement, our primary goal in code enforcement, one of our primary goals, is to get to compliance. So in our code enforcement manual, we talk about if there is a violation, then if the land use application that we have can cure that violation, then that's okay. So in the case of TID, was there work done in advance? Yes. However, that approval ultimately ended up curing it. It's not really what you want to do because, as you recall, the neighbors were very upset. And again, it can create a kind of a problem with work being done before land use. And then the same thing happened with the ski lake. They excavated, right? And then through a series of hearings officers' decisions, realized that they needed to come in for land use. And then because that land use was approved, it cured the violation.
So in this case, we we also have an approved application, right? So does that not cure this?
It does cure it. Yeah, this is more about the perception of this decision and having people believe that they should initiate their development for land use. It's more about the impression that it gives rather than the consequences of a violation. Although there could be a consequence of violation if ultimately the land use is not approved. So that's the other, I think Commissioner DeBonne spoke on that a little bit. We really don't want people to expend time, money, effort towards construction and development, because if they get denied, now they're in code enforcement and potentially have to redo all that. A really good question.
But the consequence for this applicant, if we press this issue at this moment on this hearings officer, is potentially that their project is halted.
They'll have to remove everything or convert the existing structures to an allowable use. And because it's, in this case, it's a grow structure, it could be used for other farm uses. In fact, that's how it was originally permitted, was an ag exempt structure, because it was a farm use on site. So it's not that they have to tear it down, they just have to potentially convert it to a use that is allowable in the zone. So the consequences are really varied depending on what they decide to do with the structure, should the board, for example, deny the application.
My first thought is to not act on this first decision, but possibly act on the second one. Is input for today.
And like I said, we would bring it back, and then at that point, you would decide, right? Once we have the decision out, we prepare an agenda request, and then you could decide if there's merit to staff's argument, and if you want to call it up.
Yeah, now that we've all spoken, we can study it more and understand.
Seems to make the most sense, especially if the hearings officer is consistent.
I suspect she'll be consistent with the second decision. The properties are adjoining, and it's almost the exact same fact pattern. Expenditures were made before land use approval, so I expect this very similar decision to be issued. I could be surprised, but I think it'll be the same.
You'd be really surprised.
I would be really surprised.
The Board of Commissioners reviews this, goes down some process. That would be input to the next hearings officer. Oh, the precedent of Deschutes County is this.
And we do this a lot, actually, with our staff reports. We'll put in decisions from the board, and hey, the board has dealt with this before. Here's what they ruled as a guide. In this case, we've not had this issue come before the board before. So again, because it's a local code, it's an opportunity for you to weigh in on how we should be reviewing initiation of use. And again, no decisions are made because you could ultimately decide that the hearings officer decision was correct. Perfectly fine, or not even call it up if you do believe it's correct.
I agree with Commissioner DeBonne that, the second case that you said is going to have a decision any second now.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I will call this afternoon. Commissioner Chang, did you have?
I mean, I feel a little weird about just kind of letting the first one go by and acting on the second one.
Again, we can certainly call it up. It's just there's a potential consequence to that if we don't get a decision done in the 150th day, by the 150th day. But I can certainly let Stephanie speak to the consequences of a writ, potential writ, if that's what happens. But again, if the commissioners decide it's important enough, you can call up the first one and we'll do everything we can to get in front of you as fast as possible.
I don't necessarily agree with kind of the recommendation, but I don't. I don't necessarily disagree either. I'm this is
I'm much more concerned, and maybe this, I'm taking the longer view. I'm much more concerned with future applications and how this will be applied than the one, if that makes sense, if that makes any sense at all. So I'm much more worried about future applications because we'll have many, many more initiation of these applications.
State hearings officer decision doesn't set precedence, but a commission pointing out that they're doing it. Good.
Yeah.
That's the key to this.
So I appreciate the conflict, Commissioner Chang. Yeah, believe me, I get it.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem fair, but.
But you know, whatever the will of the board is, if you want me to set this one up for a call up, I can certainly do that. If not, then I'll make sure that Avery and I are in front of you once the second decision is issued.
What I was saying, also for reviewing the second decision. Possibly, you know, after reviewing the second decision, then.
The direction from the board is not to call up the first one, and on the second one, to bring it back to discussion and possible call up.
Yes. Unless there are any other questions from the commissioners? No. Okay. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming over.
Yeah.
Other items.
The governor, draft letter to the governor.
I didn't bring anything, I didn't study it the way I wanted to, I got it.
No problem. Let me.
Passed today.
So I sent a draft to the coordinated houseless response board members. Also copied the commissioners on that draft.
Yeah.
At the board meetings, all three commissioners were there, so they heard that discussion. Since then, I incorporated changes from Commissioner Adair. And Commissioner Chang had some changes, and also Kim did. So the version that I made the changes and sent it on Saturday, so that's what's in your inbox, and the one I just handed out is the one from Saturday.
Eric, on Oasis Village. We could also add that we donated the land for that project too.
Okay, good idea.
According to my numbers from Laura, it was 399,000. If you will. I actually had a really good conversation. Do you want me not to talk right now? I know you're reading it. No, with Taylor Smiley Well. And we were talking about this, and she was saying Governor would really like to see our response. And she also said, next legislative session, Patty, I would love to go through the building with you. Just because we were talking about.
So influential?
No, well, yeah, no, she just thought that the two of us together would be really, could be really beneficial to what they're trying to do. The legislation didn't find as many things as the governor was asking for. And she thought that we might be able to make a difference on that together.
Great.
So I thought that was really, she is due to have a baby in 8 days, well, not 6 days. It's her first, and it's a boy, but no, she was really, really, really helpful. And you saw Governor Kotek was in John Day for that suicide bill for farmers that just got passed. I think she was there on Friday.
So I'm seeing some qualifier words kind of jump out if you don't mind looking at. So the very bottom of the front page. Permanent support for housing project. We are not in a position to make many long-term commitments for shelter operating funds right now. So I just make it a real clear statement. We're not in a position to make long-term commitments for shelter operating funds.
So you're suggesting deleting right now?
And the word many. So we're not in a position to make many long-term commitments. I mean, either gonna make them some or not. We already have. So we don't need to say, and yeah, so just make it as short as it proposed.
So. That I believe that's one of my suggested revisions, I made these recommendations after having a chance to speak with the governor on Friday, when she stopped by on her way back through from Sunday. And I gave sort of when I sent these revisions to Eric, I gave sort of kind of a list of kind of key things that I learned or that's kind of confirmed with the governor while we were talking. And this all just goes to say that this suggested language, I think, is the most appropriate language if we want the governor to kind of move forward and keep taking steps forward with us on things. So just some of my impressions were she understood the importance of outdoor shelter to provide a complete continuum of shelter and transitional housing facilities to address homelessness, which you could get the impression from her letter to us focused on the MAC, which MAC funding, outdoor shelter is not an eligible use of MAC funding. So you might get the impression that the governor didn't appreciate the importance of outdoor shelter. So we established that. I think she understood better how difficult it had been to develop outdoor shelter within the city of Bend over the last 2 years. After our discussion, I shared with her a lot of the unique advantages of the Gales property. She was, I think she was especially impressed to hear that the Gales property to St. Charles or to the county health services building or to a Mosaic Medical was actually closer than Oasis Villages to St. Charles and Redmond. So even though the one is within your urban growth boundary, the other one that's outside the urban growth boundary is actually closer to many key services. She appreciated that ongoing operating funds for shelters is a big challenge. And a huge challenge for all of us, the state, the county, the city, and everyone involved. And she wanted, I believe that she wants to see if she's going to help us make the Gales property happen, she wants to see us lean in and take an active role in having that facility developed, financial and otherwise. So it's not, the way that our letter was drafted initially, it was sort of like, well, we hope you'll kind of provide this land use authority, and then those folks out there are going to do great things. And I think she would like to see us be a partner in making that a successful operation, because to some extent she's sticking her neck out to help us make that possible. So she wants to see it have a high likelihood of success and have us be an active partner in it. So to go back to the sentence, if we say we're not in a position to make any long-term commitments for shelter operations, that sort of doesn't line up very well with her interest in us helping to make the Gales property.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad we're getting more clear. So when I read the question, it says, has Deschutes County ensured that all existing shelter capacity is maintained with necessary ongoing operating funding? Sounds like, is Deschutes County taking some responsibility for everybody that's open to shelter to make sure that they're all going to be happy and healthy for the long run? So that's what I'm responding to, maybe different than you're looking at.
Like I said, there was a significant amount of discussion about ongoing funding for all shelter capacity. Like I said, the governor recognized that it's a challenge for everybody. If you're concerned that she's picking on Deschutes County, I don't think that's the case.
What's to say, so you're answering something different than I'm saying. If a city buys a motel, opens up operations, and they have X amount that it costs every year, is Deschutes County gonna be there to back them up in the future when they need more money to keep it open? How would I know upfront how much I'm supposed to spend for somebody in other jurisdictions in operation? So that's what I'm responding to. You know, something that's out of our control. Are you committed to paying for that thing that you didn't start or implement? That's what I'm worried about.
None of it's in our control. I mean,
Well,
all of the projects,
We're talking about something different.
all the existing projects, and all the projects that are on the table are things that other people are doing that, you know, we have, you know, been in the position where we have the good fortune of allocating some ARPA funds or offering some land, but they're not our facilities. We don't have any shelter facilities. So if we're not investing in other entities' shelter facilities, then we're not doing anything for ongoing shelter capacity.
As I say, I mean, I'm just referring to, are we committing to paying for other people's overhead when they don't have any more money for it? And that's how I was trying to edit that sentence, so. Yeah.
Eric, I would add to the Cleveland Commons for housing, did we do 2 million for that? I would add that number in here somewhere.
I think I tried to focus on shelters, I mean.
Well, she was asking for permanent. I mean, it was a huge ask by them and we came through. I don't see that one listed.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm in that first paragraph, Veterans Village, Cleveland Commons.
Oh, yeah, did I combine those two? I did.
But that's also referring to the ongoing operations of Cleveland Commons, not $2 million ARPA. I thought that was in here, but now I'm not.
There's 2 million for the Econo Lodge with the game of Bethlehem Inn.
Right, that was a while ago.
Yeah.
No, but we allocated $2 million of ARPA funding to the Cleveland Commons permanent supportive housing on the Capitol.
Where did you put the economy? Oh, up at the top. Okay, got it.
So I'll add in the $2 million for the Cleveland Commons.
Please.
Yeah, good.
I'll do a separate, I won't put it in the bullet point list because the list is. Deschutes County has supported the following local shelters.
Right.
So I can just start a new paragraph and say in addition.
Are there any points of question, Commissioner Devon?
So, just another wording. Okay. This item number 3, options within the UGB question. It's kind of exhausted all of their options within the UGB. So about 2/3 of the way through, it says the county's inability to provide an alternative location outside the UGB that could accommodate the large numbers of houseless people. So maybe just accommodate houseless people. I mean, large numbers is just some abstract concept of, you know, exactly what we're dealing with here. So accommodate houseless people coupled with limitations created by the law of the next report.
So the suggested edit is to delete the large numbers of.
Yeah. It's just a Jacob, okay.
Delete those 4 words.
But I'm just in the mode here. The next page, it's talking at the top of the paragraph here. It says a draft proposal will come for board consideration next month. In sum, the county is developing a variety of options, but a critical missing component is the ability to relocate dispersed campers currently scattered throughout resource land to a confined area. So maybe even remove to a confined area, because then currently scattered throughout resource lands to provide basic necessities large enough to accommodate our household population. I mean, confined area. So I guess that's my response to when I use words, people get triggered and the conversation stops. So just maybe we can not have confined area. Obviously, you need to be some kind of controlled area, but
Specific area.
or I mean, it kind of reads go okay without it. So relocate dispersed campers currently scattered through resource land to provide basic necessities. Well, yeah, so maybe I have to word it a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, just the word confined.
In the options within the UGB, is it somewhere able to bring historical perspective that in 2021, we'd actually contacted Walmart with their land, the KOA campground, and at that time we were unsuccessful, and then we actually just reached out to them again and heard back, no, they're not interested. But, you know, so we were looking for something significant within the UGB.
So you're suggesting like we add that piece in that?
Yeah, just, you know, because there were options within. I asked in 21, I found my emails. Connecting with Deborah Heron and then again this time. Just Chuck Hemingway, they had thought that it was available, but it wasn't.
If we could just finish the discussion of that sentence, that one sentence, without the word area, or that is large enough to accommodate our house's population, I don't think that works, so. We at least need to have to an area. I would suggest to a specific area.
Yeah, that's fine. Just the word confined.
Okay, so we're changing combined to specific.
You know. There you go.
Although, I mean, should we leave open the option of multiples to specific areas?
No, that's fine.
That are.
Let's add an else.
That are large enough to accommodate.
Then is there support to add in a sentence or two that we've looked for areas within the UGB?
Where is that? Where you're referring to?
It would be part of the answer on 3.
That is the third answer under 3. Which sentence?
This is proposed from Patty about the Walmart property, but we wouldn't do the Walmart property, but it was just that we have reached out to a landowner with the owner of property within the UGB.
Oh, part of the public meeting talking about it anyways.
Right. I mean, I was just trying to give a historical perspective that it was something we'd done 2 years ago. We went back and did it
Yeah,
again.
you put it.
And I have the emails to document all that.
I mean, there is this sentence that says, but multiple attempts to site outdoor shelter within the city of Bend have not been successful, so I think that captures it, I mean, without specifically talking about the Walmart site.
Could then add in parentheses, including reaching out to landowners, could be put down.
Please.
We definitely did a lot of that besides that site.
Fine.
I'm mentioning excluding high value farmlands. Comes out again.
I use that language, I pulled it from the original ask. To the governor that the board signed. That's why I use that language.
Oh, yeah, when you think countywide, I guess I was thinking perimeter event.
You're thinking what?
Perimeter event, yeah, so yes, there's forests to the west, there's not a lot of high value farmland. But I mean, yeah, that's fine. Cause if there's water, there's something. The response office developed a high level model of this sort of camp, I don't know about that.
That was when we're looking at the Murphy Road camp, and there was 3 slides. And they just talk about what types of services would be part of this. Or, yeah, that was coordinating office pulled together at the time.
Great, so you're able to communicate with governor directly. Yeah, so I mean, if you think this is in alignment with what you guys discussed, we'll all be signing it.
This. Yeah. This is. I can't guarantee anything, but I think that this reflects what she was indicating to me. She would be open to working with us.
Great.
So going back to page 1, there was discussion about 3 words, many, and then the right now.
Oh, yeah. We are not in a position to make many long-term commitments for shelter operating funds right now. So it would be different than we're not in a position to make long-term commitments for shelter for operating funds. So as I say, I was at the context of other efforts started because how many times, I mean, Bethlehem Inn started like this, right? It was people offering their church basements and a little bit of support and maintenance. Then the churches got overwhelmed. One church got overwhelmed, so they rotated to multiple churches. Then they said, well, we need to have one location. Let's all support that location. And then they had a great idea. How about maybe the county can come help? And the city and the county worked together. We bought this facility. City wasn't going to qualify for a community development block grant. So then we ended up purchasing the whole building. The county ended up, and it's great that it's there, but other people's ideas put this thing in our lap sometimes. We're like, hey, wait a minute. I didn't know we were gonna have to buy this whole thing. So I'm holding on to that because since I've been in office, we had to write off all that debt. No other income for it, not a lot of recognition. So that's why I hold on to this stuff. Let's not make it sound like, well, when you come and ask the second or third time, we'll probably help pay for this. That's truly why I'm trying to say let's not make it sound like we're gonna.
Well, if we're talking specifically about the Gales property, I think that this is one of our best opportunities to partner, play an active role in something that then we can claim when we want to go and enforce a camping ordinance, or a camping code in the future. You know, we heard from Dave Doyle last week. It's very legally tenuous to clear people out of an area of county property without there being alternative places for them to go. So this would be, I mean, you know, this is not on county land. But, you know, by being an active partner, we would be, I think, I hope that we would be able to claim credit for this as a, you know, county sponsored place for people to go. I mean, Kim, do you have any, you know, legal perspective on that?
I mean, it would depend on what type of contractual relationship we obviously negotiated, but we could certainly make it as county controlled property. If they granted us that authority.
But, you know, to be county controlled, they wouldn't have to give up ownership.
No,
It
you
would
could
just
do a
be
lease,
that. it
or
would
they
just be
could-
that we are
Correct.
an active partner in the project. You know, on possibly under lease.
Well, it's too bad the two churches right on that property have not set up safe parking. It would, you know, be really, I know they've talked to them about it, but that would help.
Well, I think
So
currently
the question, back to the words again,
What,
say it.
they're currently limited under state land use.
are they the churches? Really?
Because we haven't passed a safe parking ordinance yet.
We'll have to do that.
It'll be coming to the board probably about 2 weeks. It'll be a board.
That's a good idea.
Okay. 2 weeks and then we have, does it go into emergency if we all pass it?
It's just a board order, so it goes upon effective date of when the board passes it
Okay.
or specifies the date.
Okay, in 2 weeks.
And we did mention that in this letter, right?
Yeah,
That we're working on safe parking out in the unincorporated.
Yes.
so page 1, leave as it is or change?
So are you wanting to leave it as it is?
I'd like to leave it as
Strongly?
to just to indicate that. You know, we don't have a lot of money to make a lot of commitments, but. There's a window.
Yeah, that's fine. Let's just leave it the way it is. As I say, I'm responding differently than I think you are to the question. That's what I think the difference is here.
All right, if we could have a motion, then we will finalize and get signatures.
Well, we didn't think we were gonna get here last week, did we? You were like, oh, let's see if we can send it off to, I was gonna send it to the bank committee for a review.
So is there a motion from somebody?
I move approval of this letter to Governor Kotek with revisions as discussed today.
One second, the motion.
All right, any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang.
Yes.
Commissioner Adair.
Yep.
Chair votes yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Format it up real nice, we'll sign it.
Yes. Nick will be back tomorrow and then he's out Thursday, Friday, so Thursday and Friday Whitney will be active.
All right, anything else?
Oh, I do have something.
Yeah.
I did get a call back from Chief Justice Marco Hernandez about the federal possibility of going in our courthouse on that empty floor that Mary Anderson had brought to me like 6 months ago. And he actually was interested, sent the idea on to the Ninth Circuit Court, and they're intrigued by the idea. I talked to Mary Anderson, Steve Giles was part of it, and Billy Williams had said it was 20 years overdue. So he had a couple questions, and Whitney is following up with Lee on answers to those questions. But it could be a possibility for that floor. I was shocked when he called me back. I'm like, he was so nice.
How long, any sense of the timeline for them to explore and discuss this? 'Cause
Well, he had like 4 questions. We're gonna get those answers back to him. And he said, Patty, it's government. It takes forever, but the idea is incredibly intriguing and we are definitely interested in this possibility. So anyway, I was,
So this would be to use the third shell down
Uh-huh.
the floor, not. This wouldn't make us think twice about doing that fourth
no,
shell down.
it's the 3rd floor. And then I had run into Jeff Hall like a month and a half ago. And so I waited till we knew we had the 15 million from the state because I wanted us to be in a position of power. And because Jeff said when they talked about the feds coming in before, the feds were always trying to put the burden of financial on us and the state. So I feel like we're in a better spot now. So anyway, when you get back from Lee.
Great.
This, I was like, oh my gosh, what a message.
I was able to attend the Farewell Festival pre-open house, so it was the Thursday evening events, a couple of the Fair Board members were there. The operating staff of the festival, Jeff Hines and a couple of their staff. So just be able to tour the property, see the big stages. I'm sure it was a big event. I don't know how, the attendance. Sure enough, the headline is, people got jammed up at the end trying to leave, but
3 hours.
you can see that coming from a mile away. So hopefully it was a good thing.
People who don't know how to work the fairgrounds.
Well,
From out of town.
Or how valuable it is just to stay on site. And then Friday morning, I was able to attend the chamber breakfast in La Pine, so it was good to see everybody. Chamber breakfast outside at the American.
Oh, great. Oh, and I was at the chamber. I was at Coffee Clatter in Redmond.
I attended chunks of the Farewell Festival on Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, good. So well attended,
It was well attended,
good.
great music
I
there.
was 50 miles away.
And yeah, if you know how the fairgrounds works, then no problem, but as I was driving in on Saturday afternoon, there was a line for the airport way, from Highway 97 coming from the south, there was a line of cars for the airport way exit, probably 2 miles long. It's pretty bad.
Well, my nieces were smart enough. They knew to park a mile out. So they could walk to their cars and then walk or then drive the mile where they were staying. So oh, and I did go to J Bar J's event on Saturday afternoon, the Grand Prix jumping. It was an amazing event. There were
A bit smoky though, huh?
no, it wasn't really bad at all.
Oh, good.
Yeah, because
There was times it cleared up.
yeah, no, it wasn't. I didn't notice any smoke at that event. Yeah, it was great. So
For that Farewell Festival, it'd be really interesting to hear from Jeff or Aaron Expo staff, how they did financially from that event. It was very well attended, which I know means that they made a decent chunk of change on that, but I don't know how these things work with national concert organizers and who gets what share of what. But I also, to speak to the horrible traffic concerns. That big open area behind the fair, behind all the fair and expo buildings to the east. If you could set up places for people to RV or van or tent camp out there, on a temporary basis for the festival and then just walk. If you could take 1,000, 2,000 people off of the roads for that weekend, I think it would have made a big difference. And it's a potential revenue opportunity next year.
I'll pass that along to Jeff and Whitney.
I saw Jeff, and I talked to him about that specific idea, but would love to hear that. Hear some of the numbers.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Need to get your, thank you.